Alexander Cross had been called many things in his life: visionary, tycoon, ruthless negotiator. But in the eyes of the public, he was simply the King of Steel. At 52 years old, he had built Cross Industries from a struggling regional manufacturer into one of the largest steel conglomerates in the United States. Skyscrapers bore his name, contracts worth billions were signed in his boardrooms. Yet for all the headlines and accolades, Alexander had one truth he never shared: power meant nothing in an empty home. The Cross estate sat on the northern edge of Manhattan, a sprawling, modern masterpiece of glass and steel overlooking the Hudson River. The house was designed to impress, but to Alexander, it had always felt more like a fortress than a home. It was the kind of place where every sound echoed, and silence carried a weight of its own. On a gray November morning, he stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in his office, sipping black coffee, watching rain ripple across the water. His assistant, Claire Reynolds, entered without knocking. She had worked for him for 12 years, long enough to know that formalities were unnecessary. "You've got a press conference at 10, she said, placing a folder on his desk. "The union negotiations are making headlines. Reporters will want answers." Alexander didn't turn around. "They always want answers. That doesn't mean they deserve them." Claire hesitated. "There's something else. A letter came in this morning. Personal. No return address. It was marked urgent." That made him turn. Claire handed over a slim envelope, cream-colored, with his name written in elegant handwriting. Alexander broke the seal with the same precision he used to cut a billion-dollar deal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and 4 words written in neat script. "She doesn't know you." There was no signature, no explanation. Just those words, cryptic, unsettling. "Who delivered this?" he asked. "A courier. No ID." He was gone before security could stop him. Alexander folded the paper, slipped it back into the envelope, and placed it in his desk drawer. "Clear my schedule for the rest of the morning," he said. Claire's brow furrowed. "Is it bad news?" He gave her a faint, unreadable smile. "That depends on what you call bad." 3 hours later, Alexander was in the back of his black Bentley, weaving through the narrow streets of a small town upstate. He hadn't been there in over 15 years, not since he walked away from a woman named Lily Hart. They had met when he was still building his empire, when his bank account wasn't yet lined with millions. Lily was a journalist, sharp, fearless, and the first person to challenge him without flinching. For 2 years, they were inseparable, until the demands of his business pulled him away. He told himself he was leaving for her sake, that she deserved someone present, someone who could love her without being consumed by ambition. But the truth was simpler. He had been afraid. Afraid of needing someone more than his empire. When he reached her old street, he found the little blue house unchanged, except for the weathered paint and a garden gone wild. He sat there for a moment, unsure why he'd come. Then he saw her. She was in the yard, her auburn hair tied back, a denim jacket draped over her shoulders. But she wasn't alone. A young girl, maybe 14, was kneeling beside her, laughing as she tried to plant a row of tulips. The girl's hair was the same deep auburn, her smile bright and familiar in a way that made Alexander's chest tighten. Claire's words from earlier echoed in his head. "She doesn't know you." It hit him then. This wasn't just Lily's daughter. This was his daughter. That night, Alexander returned to the estate, but sleep wouldn't come. The image of the girl's smile replayed over and over in his mind. Questions swirled. Did Lily ever try to tell him? Did she keep their daughter a secret out of anger, or to protect her? By dawn, he had made a decision. He wasn't going to walk away this time. But Alexander Cross was no ordinary man, and he knew no ordinary approach would work. If he wanted to know his daughter, he'd have to earn it, quietly, without using his wealth or influence as a weapon. The next morning, he picked up the phone and made a single call. "James," he said to his head of security, "I need you to run a background check on someone. Discreetly. No official records, no press leaks." James's voice was calm. "Name?" Alexander hesitated for half a second. "Lily Hart. And a girl named Evelyn Hart." He hung up before James could ask questions. Standing alone in his vast, silent office, Alexander realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about a contract, a merger, or a quarterly report. He was thinking about a girl with auburn hair and a smile that could break him, and the fact that she had no idea who he was. And that, he decided, was about to change. The city was waking up when James called back. "I've got something," he said. His tone was careful, as though measuring every word. "Lily Hart still lives in the same house you saw. She's a freelance editor now, keeps a low profile. No major debts, no criminal record. But her daughter Evelyn, she's interesting." Alexander leaned back in his chair, watching the first light spill across the Hudson. "Go on." "She's 14, straight-A student, plays soccer for the local team. Teachers say she's bright, but a little guarded. Like she doesn't let people get too close. There's no record of a father on her birth certificate." James hesitated. "If you want, I can arrange a direct meeting." "No," Alexander cut in. "Not yet. I don't want to ambush her. I need to see her in her world first." 2 days later, Alexander found himself parked a block away from a small-town soccer field. He sat in the driver's seat of a nondescript SUV, dressed in jeans and a baseball cap, about as far from his usual tailored suits as he could get. Evelyn was easy to spot. She moved across the field with effortless grace, her auburn ponytail bouncing as she darted past defenders. She played with focus, but every now and then, she'd glance toward the sidelines, scanning the crowd. Looking for someone, maybe. The game ended with Evelyn's team winning 3-1. As the girls walked off the field, a man approached Lily and said something that made her frown. He was tall, in his 40s, wearing a leather jacket and the kind of smirk Alexander had learned to distrust instantly. Alexander's instincts kicked in. He got out of the SUV, keeping to the shadows of the bleachers. The man's voice carried just enough for him to catch fragments. "Told you, Lily, you can't keep ignoring my calls." Lily's tone was sharp. "You don't belong here, Mark. Leave." Mark didn't move. His smirk widened. "Maybe I'll stick around. Get to know the kid." Before Alexander realized it, he was walking toward them. "Is there a problem here?" His voice was calm but carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. Mark turned, sizing him up. "And who the hell are you?" "A friend," Alexander said smoothly. "One who doesn't like seeing a woman harassed in public." Mark's eyes narrowed. "This isn't your business." "It is now." Alexander stepped closer, his posture radiating quiet authority. "You should leave." For a moment, Mark looked like he might push back. Then he caught the way Alexander's gaze didn't waver, cold, steady, and utterly certain. With a muttered curse, he turned and walked away, his boots crunching on the gravel path. Lily stared at Alexander, surprise flickering across her face. "What are you doing here?" He gave a half-smile. "I was in the neighborhood." "That's a hell of a coincidence." Her tone was skeptical. Before he could answer, Evelyn came trotting over, still in her soccer uniform. "Mom, who's this?" Lily hesitated. "Just someone I used to know." Evelyn looked at him with a polite curiosity that felt like a punch to the chest. "Hi." "Hi," Alexander replied, forcing himself to keep his voice steady. "You played well out there." "Thanks." She smiled faintly before turning back to Lily. "Can we get ice cream on the way home?" Lily nodded, and just like that, the moment was over. She and Evelyn walked away, leaving Alexander standing there, the autumn wind tugging at his jacket. That night, Alexander couldn't shake the image of Mark's smirk, or the way Lily had tensed when she saw him. Whoever this Mark was, he wasn't going away. And Alexander had a sinking feeling that the man's interest in Evelyn wasn't innocent. He picked up the phone. "James, I need everything you can find on a man named Mark Lawson. Start tonight." As he hung up, Alexander realized he had crossed a line. He wasn't just watching from a distance anymore. He was stepping into their lives. And once he stepped in, there would be no stepping back. The sun had barely risen over Manhattan, its orange glow reflecting off the glass facades of the skyscrapers, when Mark Reynolds sat at the corner table of the upscale cafe across from Whitestone Tower. The place was buzzing with early morning regulars, bankers, lawyers, and corporate executives. Mark didn't belong here today, not in his usual tailored suit, but in a worn leather jacket and jeans. The billionaire CEO had swapped his image for something more inconspicuous. Across from him, Emma Hayes stirred her coffee, her eyes darting around the room like she was afraid of being overheard. "Do you ever get used to people staring at you?" she asked, nodding toward the two men in the corner who were clearly trying to recognize Mark's face. He smirked faintly. "Comes with the territory. The trick is not caring. Which I'm terrible at." She looked at him with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Hard to imagine a guy like you not being in control of every situation. I used to think that, he replied, leaning in slightly. But lately, I've realized that control is an illusion. One phone call, one decision, and it can all unravel. Emma studied him for a moment, then took a deep breath. Then why are you helping me? You could walk away, forget I exist. Nobody would blame you. Mark's gaze hardened, the warmth in his eyes replaced by something sharper. Because I've seen this before. People getting crushed by a system designed to protect itself. And I'm not walking away this time. Before Emma could respond, the cafe door opened, and a man in a dark suit walked in. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on them for a split second before he moved toward the counter. Mark caught it. So did Emma. You know him, she whispered. Mark shook his head slowly. But he knows us. Later that morning, Mark's penthouse office was bathed in sunlight when his head of security, Julian, stepped in. Tall, mid-40s, ex-Secret Service, Julian wasn't the type to waste words. That man from the cafe, Mark said without looking up from his desk. Find out who he is. Julian placed a thin file on the desk. Already did. Name's Richard Hale. Works for a private intelligence firm out of D.C. They specialize in corporate damage control. Mark's eyes narrowed. Translation: someone's paying him to make sure certain problems disappear. Julian nodded. And based on his last 3 jobs, disappearing people is on the menu. Emma, who had been sitting quietly on the couch with a laptop, looked up sharply. Are you saying someone's after me? Julian hesitated. Let's just say, people who cross the wrong line in the wrong company tend to have accidents. Emma's hand froze over the keyboard. This is insane. I'm just... You're not just anything, Mark cut in. You saw something. Or you know something. And that makes you dangerous to whoever's pulling the strings. Her eyes flicked to him. And that includes your company? The silence that followed was heavy. Mark leaned back, studying her. Maybe. Which is why we need to find out exactly what you're holding before they do. 2 nights later, they met at a storage unit on the outskirts of Brooklyn. The rain was relentless, bouncing off the metal roofs like gunfire. Inside, the dim light flickered as Emma pried open a dented filing cabinet. These are from the restaurant, she said, pulling out a stack of manila folders. Shift schedules, payroll records, and this. She handed him a flash drive. Mark turned it over in his hand. What's on it? I'm not sure, she admitted. But I found it in Dennis's desk the night before I was fired. It was labeled, Operations, Confidential. Mark slipped it into his jacket pocket. We'll check it at my place. It's safer there. The sound of footsteps outside made them both freeze. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Did you tell anyone we'd be here? Mark drew his phone, swiping quickly. No signal. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped. The air was thick with the smell of rain and rust. Then, suddenly, the metal door rattled violently. Go, Mark hissed, shoving her toward the back exit. Now. They slipped out into the alley, the cold rain hitting them like shards of glass. A black SUV was parked at the far end, engine running, headlights slicing through the downpour. The chase. They sprinted toward Mark's car, tires splashing through puddles. A shout echoed behind them, male, aggressive. Mark shoved Emma ahead just as the first gunshot cracked through the air, the sound deafening against the metal walls. Emma stumbled, her breath ragged. They're shooting at us. Keep moving, Mark barked, grabbing her hand. They dove into the car, Mark slamming the door just as another shot shattered the passenger side mirror. The engine roared to life, and he floored it, the SUV's headlights growing smaller in the rearview mirror. Emma's hands trembled in her lap. What the hell was that? Mark didn't answer right away, eyes locked on the wet, winding road ahead. Finally, he said, that was your warning shot. They're telling us we're out of time. Back at Mark's penthouse. The city skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but the tension in the room was heavy. Mark plugged the flash drive into his encrypted laptop, Julian standing behind him. Emma sat curled on the couch, still shaking. The screen filled with spreadsheets, emails, and scanned contracts. Julian scrolled through quickly, then stopped. Mark, You need to see this. It was an email chain between Dennis, the restaurant manager, and a senior executive at Western Dining Group. They weren't just cutting payroll, they were skimming millions from a company fund meant for employee benefits. And the emails suggested someone much higher was approving it. Emma's voice was hoarse. So, it's real. Everything I thought. Mark's jaw tightened. This goes to the board. Maybe higher. And if that's true, the man after you isn't just cleaning up a local mess. He's protecting someone with a lot to lose. The cliffhanger. Mark closed the laptop and stood, pacing. If we go public, they'll come at us with everything. Legal, financial, and worse. Emma stood too, stepping toward him. So what's the plan? Before he could answer, the penthouse lights cut out. The city skyline beyond the windows went black. Julian moved instantly, pulling a gun from his holster. Backup power's been cut too, he said grimly. From the shadows, a red laser dot appeared on the far wall, then moved slowly until it rested on Emma's chest. Mark stepped in front of her. Get down! The glass exploded inward, and 3 masked figures in black tactical gear stormed the room. The sound of shattering glass still rang in Emma's ears as Mark shoved her to the floor. The masked figures moved like shadows, rifles raised, black boots silent on the marble. Julian fired first, a controlled double tap that forced the lead intruder to dive for cover behind the kitchen island. The other 2 split apart, one heading toward the far hall, the other sweeping toward Emma. Mark grabbed her by the arm and pulled her behind the heavy oak desk. Stay down, no matter what. Emma's breath came in shallow bursts. Who are they? Not the welcoming committee, Mark growled, peering around the edge. He spotted one of them inching closer. Julian. Right flank. Julian spun, firing a single shot that caught the attacker in the shoulder. The man dropped, his rifle clattering across the floor. The blackout wasn't just in the penthouse. Mark could see through the broken windows that half the skyline was dark. This wasn't a random hit. Someone had planned this to isolate them completely. The escape. Back stairwell. Julian barked, tossing Mark a spare pistol. We've got maybe 30 seconds before more of them get up here. Mark pulled Emma to her feet. Move. They ran through the side hall, the pounding of boots echoing behind them. A sharp whistle cut through the air, some kind of signal, and then a burst of gunfire chased them down the corridor, bullets splintering the walls. Emma stumbled, Mark catching her before she hit the ground. Keep going, Hayes, he urged, using her last name in the clipped, urgent tone of someone used to commanding people under fire. They burst into the stairwell, spiraling down 3 flights before a shadow appeared below, another masked figure, already raising his weapon. Julian didn't hesitate. He threw himself forward, slamming the man into the wall. The rifle went off, the shot deafening in the enclosed space, but the round went high, shattering a light fixture instead of a person. Mark didn't look back. He just pulled Emma past, hearing the grunts of hand-to-hand combat behind him. The alley. They hit the service exit hard, stumbling into a narrow alley soaked in rain. Mark's black sedan was parked just 20 feet away, but the roar of an approaching engine made him freeze. A second SUV screeched to a stop at the mouth of the alley. The driver's door opened, and Vincent Kane stepped out. It was the first time Emma had seen him, and the effect was immediate. His presence was cold, magnetic. He wasn't shouting or holding a weapon, yet the threat was palpable. Mark, Kane said evenly, as though they were old friends meeting for lunch. You've been busy. Cut the small talk, Vincent, Mark replied, his voice flat. You're a long way from Jersey. Kane's gaze shifted to Emma. And this must be the reason. I was wondering what could pull the great Mark Reynolds into the gutter. Now I see it's just a waitress with a knack for bad luck. Emma's eyes flashed. You're behind all this. Kane tilted his head, almost amused. Behind? My dear, I am this. The twist. Mark took a step forward, squaring his shoulders. You won't touch her. Kane's smile was slow and deliberate. I already have. He nodded toward the SUV, and the rear door opened. A 4th masked man stepped out, holding a small, battered laptop bag. He tossed it at Mark's feet. Check it, Kane said. Mark crouched, unzipping the bag. Inside was the very same laptop he'd used earlier that night to examine the flash drive, except now the screen, when opened, was cracked and flickering. Files were missing. The drive itself was gone. Kane's voice was almost conversational. While you were playing hero upstairs, we were taking what we came for." Emma's stomach dropped. "The evidence. Gone," Kane finished for her. "And the only copy is now in my possession. Which means you're exactly where I want you, Reynolds. Unarmed, empty-handed, and one step behind. Cliffhanger push." Mark straightened slowly, meeting Kane's gaze without flinching. "You think this is over?" Kane's expression turned razor-sharp. "No, Mark. This is me being polite. You'll know when it's over." He stepped back into the SUV, the door slamming shut. Tires screeched on wet asphalt, and within seconds they were gone, leaving only the fading echo of his threat. Emma turned to Mark, rain dripping from her hair. "Now what?" Mark's jaw was set like stone. "Now, we take the fight to him." But before he could say more, Julian stumbled out of the stairwell, blood streaking down the side of his face. "Mark, we've got a bigger problem. The board knows about her. They're calling an emergency meeting at sunrise." Mark's eyes went cold. The game had just changed, and not in their favor. The rain had just stopped when Mark stepped out of the black sedan in front of his penthouse tower. The streets still glistened under the dim streetlights, puddles reflecting shards of the city skyline. His suit was slightly wrinkled from hours of tension, and his mind was sharper than the chill in the air. Emma trailed behind him, her coat clutched tight around her. She hadn't said much during the drive back from the failed evidence drop, but her silence was louder than any words. Inside the private elevator, the air felt too still. Mark kept his gaze forward, jaw tight. Emma finally broke the silence. "You didn't tell me Vincent Kane had that kind of power." Mark's lips pressed into a thin line. "I didn't want to scare you." Her eyes narrowed. "Mark, you've been dragging me into something way bigger than I ever imagined. I deserve the truth." He turned to face her, the soft hum of the elevator filling the pause. "The truth. The man you saw tonight doesn't just run a business. He runs people, buys them, owns them. And right now, he wants to own this company, and me." Emma's hands tightened on her coat. "And what about me?" Mark's expression softened for the first time that night. You're the only part of this whole thing I'm not willing to bargain with." The elevator chimed, doors sliding open to his penthouse, a sleek expanse of glass and steel, city lights stretching endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. But tonight, the luxury felt like a cage. As soon as they stepped inside, Mark's assistant, Claire, rushed forward, her usual poise gone. "Mark, the board has called an emergency meeting. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., in the executive conference room. Vincent's influence is all over this. Half the members are already leaning his way." Mark loosened his tie and poured himself a drink. "Then I guess tomorrow we find out how deep his claws go." Claire's eyes darted to Emma, then back to Mark. "They're bringing up the incident from 3 years ago." Mark froze mid-sip. Emma's brow furrowed. "What incident?" "Nothing that concerns you," Mark said quickly. Emma stepped closer. "Don't do that. Don't shut me out now." Mark exhaled, setting the glass down. "It was a hostile takeover attempt. I stopped it, but they claimed I used questionable methods. Vincent's been sitting on that file, waiting for the right moment. Looks like tomorrow's the moment." Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. "And if they believe him?" Mark looked straight at her. "Then I lose everything. And Vincent gets to decide what happens to you." The weight of his words hung in the air. The next morning, the conference room at Weston Global was a fortress of glass and mahogany. 12 high-backed leather chairs formed a perfect oval around a polished table. The skyline beyond the panoramic windows painted the room in a cold, morning light. Mark walked in wearing a charcoal suit that seemed cut from defiance itself. Emma followed a step behind, her presence turning a few heads among the board members, most of them older, all of them calculating. Vincent Kane was already there. He sat casually at the far end of the table, a faint smirk playing on his lips, like a man who'd already read the final page of the book. "Mr. Whitmore," the chairwoman began, "we have serious allegations regarding your conduct and the security of this company's assets." Mark took his seat slowly, locking eyes with Vincent for a brief, electric moment. "Then let's hear them." Vincent leaned back, speaking as though the words were an afterthought. 3 years ago, you orchestrated the removal of a majority shareholder by coercion. I have signed affidavits, phone records. That shareholder, Mark interrupted, was stealing from the company. And I acted to protect it. Vincent's smirk widened. Protect it, or own it entirely. There's a fine line, Mark. A murmur rippled through the room. Emma clenched her hands under the table. One of the older board members, Mr. Callahan, adjusted his glasses. There's also the matter of Ms. Harper. His gaze slid toward Emma. Her sudden presence in your life has raised questions. There are rumors she's involved in matters that could compromise us. Emma's head snapped up. Excuse me. Vincent's voice was smooth as silk. Mark, it's a shame when personal attachments cloud business judgment. You've been protecting this young woman with company resources. Care to explain why? Mark's jaw flexed. She's under my protection because Vincent Kane has been trying to harm her. That's the only explanation you need. Vincent spread his hands in mock innocence. Or perhaps she's been helping you cover your tracks. The room grew colder. The breaking point. The questioning dragged on for nearly an hour. Every answer Mark gave was met with skepticism, every defense undercut by another coincidence Vincent conveniently presented. Finally, the chairwoman leaned forward. Mr. Whitmore, this board will deliberate. But given the gravity of these allegations, I must ask, will you voluntarily step aside while we investigate? Mark's eyes flashed. No. Vincent's smirk deepened. Then they'll vote. Emma could feel the walls closing in. She could see it. The numbers were against him. If the board voted today, Vincent would win. And if Vincent won, she wouldn't be safe another day. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Without thinking, she rose from her seat. If this is about me, then let me end it. I'll leave. I'll disappear. Just leave Mark out of this. Mark shot to his feet. Emma, no. But Vincent's eyes gleamed like a predator. Now that might be acceptable. The board members exchanged murmurs. Mark's voice cut through them. She's not part of this deal. Vincent shrugged. Then neither are you. The chairwoman tapped her pen against the table. If Ms. Harper leaving removes a conflict of interest, it may influence the vote. Emma's heart was a drum in her chest. She looked at Mark, saw the fury and the fear in his eyes. It's okay, she whispered. I can handle it. Mark shook his head. You don't understand. Vincent stood, straightening his cuffs. I'll have my car ready for you, Miss Harper. Emma didn't move. She looked at Mark one last time, her eyes saying everything her lips couldn't. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Mark started after her, but two security officers stepped into his path. The door closed behind Emma. Vincent's smile was the last thing Mark saw before the meeting dissolved into chaos. And that's where Part 5 ends, with Emma seemingly sacrificing herself to protect Mark, and Vincent one step closer to victory. The audience is left hanging. Did Emma really leave for good? What is Vincent planning to do with her now? And how will Mark fight back when he's been outmaneuvered on every front? The SUV door thudded shut like a verdict. Emma kept her breathing even as the city smeared into ribbons of light. Across from her, Vincent Kane looked like a man who'd never hurried in his life. Charcoal suit, rain still beating on the shoulders. Comfortable? He asked. Kidnapped is the word, Emma said. You could have tried a calendar invite. Vincent's mouth curved. You're quick. Good. Clarity saves time. Then be clear. Why me? Because Mark Reynolds bleeds for people, not spreadsheets, he said. Your leverage. I'm not a pawn. That, Vincent said, is what makes you useful. They rolled into a private garage, sterile light, cameras tucked into columns, an elevator with a red plate, Marlowe Tower, private access. The detail snagged in Emma's head. Marlowe. Where had she seen that name? As a guard nudged her forward, she palmed the cheap digital watch Mark had insisted she wear. 2 long presses, 1 short. Panic ping sent. If the line wasn't jammed. If the battery held. The elevator opened to a gray-quiet foyer and a woman with a severe bob, Dana, hugging a tablet. Ms. Hayes, Dana said. This way. The suite they led her into looked like a boutique hotel. Pretty, impersonal, too quiet. A glass of water on a table. A white envelope. A logoless phone. Emma opened the envelope. 4 neat lines. Tell Mark to sign at 4 p.m., temporary control to the interim chair. You go home if he does. Choose clarity. She lifted the phone. Only one contact. Call. She hit it. Emma. Mark's voice was low, urgent, the air of a man walking fast. Offices hushed around him. Tell me where you are. Marlowe Tower. 30-ish floors up. Suite dressed like a spa with cameras. Private garage below. Marlowe. We have a Marlowe family trust on our registry, he said. They hold Class B shares. Say that again, Emma cut in. Marlowe Trust. Yeah. Emma, don't give Vincent anything. I'm already moving on the board. He wants your signature at 4, she said. He says I go home if you do. I won't. I know, Emma said. That's not why I called. A beat. He recalibrated. Why then? Because this isn't only Vincent. The elevator plate said Marlowe. That ring bells besides the trust. Could be a proxy for a board insider, Mark said. Likely Margaret Dwyer's family office. She chairs nominations. Emma, are you alone? Not for long. Footsteps outside. Listen, he dropped his voice a rasp. They'll try to force a vote. I can freeze governance with the SEC, litigation hold, special committee, 13D collusion flag. But I need proof of an insider working with a hostile actor. Dwyer is my bet. Don't let Vincent pull me off the board. 4 is theater, she said. Real moves probably 2. My phone call cut short. You're not a pawn. Told Vincent that, she said. The door opened. Dana stepped in with a new guard. Emma gave Mark one last breath. Whatever happens, stay on the floor. That's how we win. The line went dead. Dana reclaimed the phone. Good, she said. You're doing fine. Fantastic, Emma said. Where do I pick up my prize? Mr. Kane will see you now. Reynolds HQ hummed at an insider frequency, hurrying shoes, soft slaps of decision. Claire fell in beside Mark, a tablet glowing like a dashboard. SEC notice drafted, she murmured. Outside counsel ready. Julian pinged Emma's watch. He's already shadowing Marlowe Tower. Ownership? Mark asked. Claire's wrist flicked. Marlowe Tower LLC, Stonebridge Investments, Dwyer Family Office. He stopped. Margaret Dwyer. The same, Claire said. She's shepherding proxies. Tell legal, books and records demand on Dwyer plus every entity she's touched in 2 years. Litigation hold across email, chat, personal devices too. And pull every prior settlement labeled governance concerns. I want names we paid to go away. You're going to war, she said. I'm already in one. I'm choosing the terrain. Julian called. 2 blocks out, he said. Private security thick. Emma's ping holding 32nd floor, south corner. Eyes only, Mark said. No firefights. And Julian, this is bait to pull me off the board. I know, Julian said. Stay vertical. Mark killed the call, dialed Bill Callahan. You're about to be offered a dragon in a suit, he said. Don't climb on. Callahan chuckled. Metaphors, son. You got proof. Dwyer's family office owns the box Kane's using as a cage, Mark said. Vote with her and the SEC will teach your grandkids your name in case law. Can we buy time with a special committee? Callahan asked. If audit gets a material risk notice for hostile collusion and SEC hears the whisper, any vote looks like obstruction, Mark said. Callahan exhaled. I never liked Dwyer's sermons. Good, Mark said. Sermons are for absolution. I'm offering facts. Give me an hour. Click. Vincent let Emma see the room, a small, expensive stage with a wall-sized screen. He gestured to a chair. She stayed standing. You posture well, he said. Standing signals fight. Sit looks like surrender. He poured a drink and left it untouched. Tell me about the flash drive. What flash drive? Emma. His tone was player to player. You aren't here for your resume. You're here because you blocked a theft. You sent rifles into a penthouse, she said. I sent discipline into a legal gray, he said. Recovered property. Aligned incentives. You rehearse that in the mirror? His eyes warmed, not kind, interested. Mark is not a saint. He keeps his hands cleaner than his peers by outsourcing the dirt. When men like that fall, the splash is wide. I'm trying to keep you dry. You don't get to pretend you're doing me a favor. Not pretend, Vincent said. Promise. He signs at 4. You go home. Stipend. Security for a year. Your brothers. Don't. Her voice cracked like a whip. Don't bring him in here. Vincent set the glass down. Then put Mark in. Call him. Tell him to come now. If he walks through my door alone, we skip the vote. You want him off the boardroom floor, she said. Pick a person over the company. Then you win both. He didn't deny it. I'm not calling him, Emma said. Keep me if you want. Hurt me if you have to. I won't be bait. A flicker crossed his face, the tiniest tilt. Very well. Let's try a different route. He tapped his watch. The wall lit with a live feed, a conference room, audit pre-session. Margaret Dwyer in pearls and poise. 2 lawyers entered. One profile familiar. Emma squinted. That's Richard Hale. He tailed us at a cafe. Vincent's mouth twitched. Mr. Hale consults widely. For Dwyer, Emma said. And for you. For outcomes, Vincent said. Stop chasing nouns. We live in verbs. Then let's act, she said. She crossed to the bar, palmed a pen, scribbled a napkin. Marlowe equals Dwyer F.O. Hale bridging. CC. 13D collusion. She slid it up her sleeve. Bathroom, she said. Unless your clarity includes humiliation. Vincent gestured. Dana escorted her. Inside, Emma locked the door, ran the faucet, pried open a slim maintenance panel under the sink, a tangle of legacy cables. She wedged the napkin corner into the seam so the edge showed, off-white against gray, visible on a sweep. Crude breadcrumb. But a breadcrumb. She washed hands for show and came out. Your towel's scratchy, she told Dana. Noted, Dana said. Back in the suite, the feed showed Dwyer's lips moving, lawyers pointing at highlighted clauses. Emma looked at Vincent, not the screen. 2 hours to curtain, he said. Tick-tock, she said, smiling like steel. On the executive floor, Claire's tablet chimed. She swiped, showed Mark a grainy still from Julian. Side alley, Marlowe Tower. A maintenance panel ajar. Something white wedged at the seam. Mark zoomed. Ink bled faint. A napkin. She flagged the building, he said, voice going bright with awe. Breadcrumb. Claire's eyes sharpened. Then we follow. Not with a battering ram, Mark said. With fire code. He rattled off orders, outside counsel, into the record now. Demand letters to Stonebridge and Marlowe Tower LLC custodians. Whisper to audit we have contemporaneous evidence of collusion. I'll testify under oath. Freeze the faint hearts. Claire, call Julian. Don't storm, evacuate. Trip the halon suppression. Towers panic. They flush detainees to safe exits. We trade places with expectation. Copy, Claire said, already moving. Julian preferred stairs. Stairs told the truth. He waited in a service stairwell, listening to the building's metronome, timed rotations, predictable AV walks, then Claire's voice hit his ear, trip in 5, 4. The building sighed. AC cut. A polite ceiling voice, please proceed to the nearest exit. Doors opened. Voices rose. Julian stepped into a corridor a shade too nice for ducks, just as Dana rounded the corner with a guard and Emma between them. Ma'am, Julian said, badge flash smooth, bored. Private suites to stairwell B. A is under maintenance. Dana frowned. We always take A. Always is how people die, he said flatly. B. She complied. The guard hovered, then followed. At the B door, a voice floated down the stairwell above. Silk over steel. Vincent. Dana. Emma didn't look up. She looked at Dana instead, eyes wide, manufactured fear, and pivoted hard. Her shoulder slammed Dana's ribs, her foot scythed the guard's knee. Julian's men flowed. A weapon clattered. Go! Julian barked. They bolted down the stairs. A shot sparked stone. Julian wedged the door with a steel chalk, popped a smoke pellet, white bloom, and drove through the cloud. 2 flights, into a mechanical hall. Sirens. Red strobes on metal. Loading dock, Julian said, cutting left. The door opened onto Vincent. 2 men flanked him. "Miss Hayes," he said pleasantly. "Wrong door." "Maybe," Emma said. "But it's the right story." "What story is that?" "The one where the board learns you walked me through a building owned by a member's family office," she said. "With cameras." "If the cameras were off, then your alibi is too." Vincent's eyes ticked to Julian. "Tell Mark this was clever," he said. "Halon buys hours, not days." "Tell him yourself," Julian said. They collided, the guards, a hamper, a rolling bin. Julian shoved chaos into the path and yanked Emma through a no exit door that lied. A tight service run. A Halon test whispered the air thin, enough to make Vincent's men hesitate. Through a freight elevator, down to subbasement, into a waiting black van. "Is this your idea of fun?" Emma panted. "On Tuesdays," Julian said, almost smiling. The van shot into a tunnel. A black SUV slid in behind like a shadow that had paid rent. Julian lifted a sleek rectangle he'd palmed. Dana embossed. "Tablet." He handed it to Emma. She typed a guess, CLR1TY, and it unlocked. Inside meetings. 2 p.m., audit pre-session, private. Location, Marlowe Tower, L32, Suite C. 4 p.m., special board session, public release ready. Location, Reynolds, Boardroom A. A third line hidden under notes. 4:05 p.m., contingency, if CEO absent, protective custody, transfer. Location, Marlowe Tower, basement holding. Emma went cold. "They weren't going to swap me for a signature," she said. "They were going to keep me either way. And if Mark skipped the board, they'd scoop him up after," Julian finished. "On their property, their cameras, their narrative." The van swung hard left. The SUV mirrored. 2 blocks, Claire's voice crackled. Reynolds loading bay up. "Come home." "Copy," Julian said. Emma hugged the tablet like a life vest. "Hold, Mark," she breathed. "Please hold." At Reynolds, Mark stood in an empty boardroom, the skyline burning gold. Callahan slipped in. Audit froze action. Dwyer's furious. "She'll get over it," Mark said. "Or go under." "Watch your ankles," Callahan said wryly. Claire hustled in. Julian's 2 out. Service elevators prepped. SEC on hold. Outside counsel in the war room. "Good," Mark said. It tasted like iron. 3:56. A junior counsel poked in. "They're assembling in A. Tell them I'll be along," Mark said. 3:58. "When Julian gets in," Mark told Claire, "straight to service lifts. No public cams on Emma." "She'll hate that," Claire said. "She can file a complaint," he said. "After." Her tablet chimed. Color drained from her face. "Julian's feed dropped," she whispered. "Last ping under the viaduct. Then nothing." Mark looked from Claire to the clock. 3:59. The hum across the hall rose. Mics alive, chairs scraping, breath held. His phone lit. Unknown number. 1 line. Basement holding. 4:05. "If you're not there, I will be. E." Mark's hand closed around the phone until plastic creaked. "Don't," Claire said. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the only way to break a trap is to step into it first." He turned toward the service elevators. "Then don't miss," Claire said. The doors slid shut on his face. The wall clock ticked to 4:01. 4 p.m., executive floor, boardroom A. Microphones hum. Leather chairs scrape. The city glows copper in the glass. Margaret Dwyer takes the center seat, Peril sitting like a verdict. "Call this special session to order. Interim governance, pending investigation." At the side door, Claire stands with a folder and a tablet hugged to her chest like a shield. Behind her, a speakerphone shows 3 silent lines: SEC duty officer, audits outside counsel, and a regional business reporter who never misses blood. She doesn't speak yet. She times the room. 4:01 p.m., service elevator, Reynolds HQ. Mark taps a small clip on his lapel. Looks like a tie pin, isn't, and hits B2. The doors close on a face that's too calm for the hour. Sometimes the only way to break a trap, he told Claire, is to step into it first. Claire had answered, "Then don't miss." 4:02 p.m., Reynolds loading bay. The black van slips under the half-raised gate. The tailing SUV melts right and disappears behind a box truck. Julian cracks the door. Straight to service lifts. No public cams. Emma hugs a tablet marked Dana. And then, Julian, we put this in the only hands that can weaponize it in 10 minutes. He means Claire. 4:03 p.m., Marlowe Tower, basement holding. Concrete dress-like policy. Bare walls, oak table, 2 chairs, a camera you can't see. Vincent Kane stands like the room belongs to him. I didn't expect you to come, Mark. You sent an invitation, Mark says, closing the door. I RSVP'd. Vincent gestures. Please. Mark stays standing. Clarity. If I'm here, you don't touch her. Vincent's smile doesn't move. If you're here, I don't have to embarrass you in front of your board. So we're doing favors, Mark says. The door opens. A guard takes a position off Mark's shoulder. Pure theater, still effective. Vincent steeples his fingers. Temporary authority to the interim chair. It's fast and clean. You keep optics, I keep momentum. Ms. Hayes goes home. Stipend. Security. College funds if I'm feeling tender. And the part where you and Dwyer launder collusion through Marlowe Tower LLC. Mark asks, do I initial that or is it implied? A 10th-degree flicker in Vincent's eyes. You have a flair for drama. I have nouns, Mark says. Dwyer. Stonebridge. Marlowe. Hale. Vincent. Boring words. Then verbs, Mark says, and touches his lapel clip like he's fixing a tie. A tiny grin on Claire's tablet flips from mute to live. She exhales once. 4:04 p.m., Boardroom A. Dwyer, given today's disclosures. Claire steps in, smile polite enough to be dangerous. Madam Chair, before the board proceeds, audit's outside counsel needs to hear a live material event. Dwyer's tone is ice. This is a closed session. Exactly, Claire says. She taps the tablet. The wall screen splits, agenda left, a gray room right. No picture, audio only. Whispers rise like wind. Dwyer, whose feed? Facility maintenance access, Claire says. Marlowe Tower basement. A building owned by your family office. Callahan tries not to smile and fails. On audio, Vincent, amused. You're stalling, Mark. Mark, I'm choosing the terrain. 4:05 p.m., basement holding. Vincent leans back. Sign the paper. Mark sets a page on the table. Dent cites, a signature block empty. This is a notice to the SEC and to audit. I believe a hostile actor, he holds Vincent's gaze, is colluding with a board insider to effect governance changes contrary to Rule 149. I'll swear to it under oath. Vincent's smile thins. You think that scarecrow works on men like me? I think Callahan remembers subpoenas, Mark says mildly. And your client upstairs prefers pearls to handcuffs. A soft chime pings in Mark's pocket. He ignores it. Claire doesn't, on her phone. The SEC line clicks hot. This is SEC duty, a crisp voice says over Claire's speaker. We're recording. Dwyer finally looks rattled. Vincent taps the table once. You brought a microphone. You brought a camera, Mark says. Different hobbies. 4:06 p.m., Reynolds Loading Bay. Outside counsel in Navy has already arrived. Tell me you have something I can file in 6 minutes. Emma hands over Dana's tablet. Open to meetings, notes. The lawyer schemes, eyes sharpening. Material violation. Emergency relief. Preservation orders on Stonebridge and Marlowe Tower. I need a judge. Claire hands her a phone. Dialed. Emma, where's Mark? Claire holds her gaze. Choosing terrain. Julian, which means he went where they wanted him and made it a stage. Emma nods once. Then we make sure there's an audience. 4:07 p.m., Boardroom A. The right-hand audio becomes the room's gravity. A younger member clears his throat. This is irregular. Which is why it's perfect, Callahan murmurs. On audio. Vincent, you're playing with fire. Mark, good. It's cold in here. Vincent nods at the guard. Script time. Escort the CEO out, or force a signature. Either way, Mark loses. Mark steps slightly out of the guard's path, lets his wrist graze the chair back. On Claire's screen, basement holding, Liv flashes a green confirmation. "Madam Chair," Claire says pleasantly, "please face the screen." Dwyer turns. 4:08 p.m., basement holding. Vincent watches Mark like a hawk measures wind. "Last chance." "For both of us," Mark says, and sets down a second page beside the notice. Not paper, a glossy still frame. Marlowe Tower lobby. Vincent, Dana, and Emma crossing beneath private premises. No unauthorized security removals. A beat. Vincent's pulse ticks in his throat. "The sign is ugly," Mark says. "The jurisdiction is beautiful." A new voice at the door. Calm. Female. "Mr. Kane." It's not his lawyer. Vincent doesn't look away. "You're fast," he tells Mark. "I'm old," Mark says. "I start early." 4:09 p.m., loading bay. Outside counsel lowers her phone and smiles like opposing counsel is about to have a bad day. Judge Martinez signed the TRO. "We serve it now." Claire dials. "You're served," she says, and hangs up on outrage. Emma's breath finally releases. "We bought him time." "A window," Claire corrects. "Time is always rented." Julian eyes the monitors. One shows the tailing SUV idling 3 blocks out. Another, piggybacked maintenance cam, shows a side stairwell in Marlowe. 2 men descending. "Your window has company," Julian says. 4:10 p.m., basement holding. Vincent stands. He doesn't raise his voice. "You can't outlast me, Mark. You can only outplay me for a day." "I don't need a day," Mark says. "I need 10 minutes. "Why?" "Because upstairs, a woman with pearls is deciding whether she prefers dinner at home or in a federal conference room." "Dwyer is stone," Vincent says. "Stones crack," Mark says softly. "They just pretend not to feel it." The door cracks again. Building security, not Vincent's men, step in with a printout. "Mr. Kane, we received an emergency order. This space is subject to immediate preservation. No removals." Vincent accepts the paper, folds it like nothing bends him. "Tell legal I'll call in 3. They leave. He looks at Mark. "You got your 10 minutes. Enjoy the next 5. Mark's eyes tick to the frame. A tiny magnetic click. A sensor. A log. A lever. He looks back and lets a thin, sharp grin show. "Lose something." The lights flicker, down, up, like a blink. A low thrum rolls through the concrete like a train behind a wall. "Vincent, what did you do?" "Mark, nothing. Yet." 4:11 p.m., boardroom A. Phones light around the table. Dwyer's, 2 others, then a chorus. Claire calmly hits record to archive and opens the doors so the hallway can hear a basement conversation become corporate scripture. Callahan leans back, enjoying the show. "Madam Chair, I propose we adjourn pending Council's review, SEC interest, and whatever is rattling your pipes." Dwyer doesn't dignify it. She watches the screen the way a queen watches weather. 4:12 p.m., loading bay. Outside counsel, TRO served. Claire, copy. Emma squeezes the tablet. "If they wrote this much down, what did they delete?" "Nothing is deleted," Claire says. "It's only hidden." "Then let's find it," Emma says, fingers flying. Julian's radio crackles. The driver, SUV, is moving. "Toward us?" Julian asks. "Negative. Toward Marlowe." Emma's jaw sets. "They're doubling the basement." Julian, we walk Claire in. "Evac routes only. We look like we own them." "And if we don't?" Emma asks. "Then we pretend better," Julian says. 4:13 p.m., basement holding. Vincent's phone vibrates. He glances, pockets it. "You filed." "I breathed," Mark says. Vincent studies him. "Your man in the stairwell is about to make a mistake. I can stop it, or let him learn." "You won't touch him," Mark says. "Confidence," Vincent says. "Cameras," Mark corrects. Vincent nods to the guard. Somewhere in a stairwell, 2 men pause like someone put a hand on their chests. 4:14 p.m., executive floor, outside boardroom A. SEC duty officer on speaker, "We acknowledge receipt." If any board action proceeds despite the TRO, we open a formal inquiry. Claire, understood. We're preserving everything. Emma doesn't lift her eyes from the tablet. Check docs again there. A PDF. Highlighted clause. For the avoidance of doubt, parties acknowledge operational coordination between Marlowe Tower Security and Reynolds Interim Governance Proxy. Julian swears under his breath. They wrote their collusion. Branded, Emma says. 4:15 p.m., 2 clocks. Upstairs, theater. Downstairs, trap. They click toward one another. Vincent steps closer, voice low enough for the mic and the future. You love hope. I love certainty. Hope is a lever, Mark says. Certainty is a cage. Let's see which breaks first. The door swings open. Not guards. Not counsel. Richard Hale, polite as poison. The bridge between Dwyer and Kane. Mr. Reynolds, Hale says. This way. Claire's whisper ghosts Mark's ear through the lapel mic. We're in the building. 30 seconds. Mark doesn't turn his head. He smiles like a man meeting weather. After you, he tells Hale. He steps into the hall. The door closes with a padded click. 4:16 p.m., Boardroom A. Callahan, Madam Chair, adjourn. Dwyer taps her pen once. Sets it down. Adjourned, she says, and the gavel falls on her own knuckles. Phones keep buzzing. No one moves fast enough. Claire already has. Julian, status. Julian, service hall, 1 level up from holding. 2 ahead of us. Claire, copy. We're coming down. Emma, I'm coming with you. Claire, no public cams. No crowded floors. And you stay behind me. Emma, deal. 4:17 p.m., Marlowe Tower, service corridor. Fluorescence wine. The floor gleams. The air smells like cold metal. Julian raises a fist. Stop. He points. Left, basement holding. Right, stair B. He whispers. 2 ahead. Timing. Claire nods. On 3. Emma presses Dana's tablet to her chest. We're not armed, she whispers. Julian, we're not here to shoot. We're here to interrupt. He checks his watch. 3, 2. The building lights flicker again. Go. They move. 4:18 p.m., basement hallway. Hale walks like he already owns the outcome. You understand this is for your safety, he tells Mark. We have a statement prepared. You'll review before release. Mark's tone is bored. You wrote it in advance. We prepare contingencies, Hale says. Like kidnapping my employee in a related parties building, Mark says. Hale smiles faintly. Strong word. Accurate word. Ahead, a security door marked holding. Hale badges it. The magnet clicks. The kind of click you only hear if you're listening for it. Mark is. Behind them, footsteps. Not rushed. Professional. Julian's cadence. Hale glances back. Sees nothing. Smiles anyway. He pushes the door. And from the cross corridor, Claire's voice, calm and sharp, cuts the air. Mr. Hale, you are now on a recorded line, and you've been served a TRO. Do not move Mr. Reynolds another step. Hale turns. Julian is already there, hands visible, stance relaxed, eyes very awake. Emma stands a half step behind Claire, tablet up, camera active. Hale's smile doesn't falter. Counsel. Outside counsel, the Navy suit says, stepping forward. And SEC on the line. Hale, then we all appreciate clarity. Vincent appears behind Hale, silent, measured, hands empty. He looks at Claire first, then at Emma, then at Mark, like a man cataloging chess pieces that won't stay where he puts them. Mr. Reynolds, Vincent says, your board has adjourned. For today. For today, Mark agrees. Vincent's gaze lands on the tablet in Emma's hands. He doesn't ask to see it. He doesn't need to. He knows what's on it. Walk him upstairs, Claire tells building security, not looking at Vincent at all. Now. Security hesitates, then nods. Yes, ma'am. Hale steps aside. It looks like courtesy. It isn't. Mark passes Emma. Their eyes catch for half a breath. You okay? He asks. No, she says, honest. "But I'm standing." "Good," he says softly. "Stay that way." They move as a group, security, counsel, Claire, Julian, Emma, toward the service elevators. Vincent and Hale watch them go. Hale leans in, murmurs something only Vincent hears. Vincent's eyes do not move. "Plan C," he says, almost too quiet to count. 5 minutes. Emma hears it anyway. She doesn't look back. The elevator doors slide open. They step inside. Doors glide shut. The floor indicator blinks. B2, B1, L1. And stops. The panel goes dark. The car hums once, like a thought changing direction. A small red line appears where the floor number should be. Override. Emma looks at Mark. Mark looks at Claire. Julian's hand floats to the emergency hatch, already moving. Somewhere in the concrete, something clicks. The light snaps to a new word. The elevator starts to descend. Cut to black. The elevator didn't jolt, it obeyed. The panel erased its numbers and displayed a single red word, override. Claire caught Mark's glance. Julian was already at the ceiling hatch, fingers finding the recessed bolts by memory. Emma pressed Dana's tablet against her ribs and kept her breathing even. The carriage eased downward on a controlled glide. The panel swapped to down. No floor count, no speed. A remote hand had taken the controls. Julian cracked the hatch, felt hot air and cable tremor, and feathered the brake, just enough to blunt momentum without triggering an interlock. The hum underfoot dropped half a note. The car paused in the shaft, considered, and moved again. When the doors finally parted, they didn't reveal a lobby or any labeled level. The opening presented a narrow, immaculate corridor, polished concrete, quiet sconces, an end door of satin steel with a frosted panel stenciled by a serif font, ADR. Alternative Dispute Resolution. They kept positions without instruction. Claire scanned for jurisdiction and cameras. Julian traced corners and seams. Mark assessed the single obvious lever in view, the room, and Emma looked for the hidden ones. The ADR suite was a showroom for compliance. Long table, carafes, wall screen idling with Reynolds logo, a neat stack of papers with a pen placed like a prompt. Outside counsel in Navy stopped at the threshold. One more step would invite an argument about contaminated venue. She waited there, phone up, already drafting. Julian found 2 ceiling eyes and a mic buried in the baseboard and a second in the table seam. Claire acknowledged the fact without comment. This was a stage. Mark read the top sheet without touching it. Consent order and undertaking. The language was the language of pressure braided into accommodation. Temporary abdication of executive authority pending investigation. No admission of guilt. Non-interference pledges. Appointment of an interim chair via nominations. The trap glinted in a subclause. Protective custody protocols within controlled facilities. Legal gloss on a cage. The signature block was blank. Beneath it, the paper bore the faint grooves of an earlier hand that had pressed hard. Someone else had signed a sibling form. Another day, another basement. The operation was industrialized. Claire photographed every page. Outside counsel mirrored each click. The wall screen shifted. The idol logo dissolved into Vincent Kane's face, properly lit, unhurried. He addressed the room as if it were a board breakout, a calm pitch for order, for safety, for a clean interim. He referenced none of the microphones or the cams that recorded his reasonableness. He offered nothing new. He did not need to. The paper did the saying. No one answered him. The screen blinked black. Somewhere behind the drywall, something heavy slid into place and settled, the sound of a magnet finding steel and closing a circuit. Julian pulled the door, 3 inches, then a patient stop. A second magnet deeper in the frame held the rest. The suite's control lived under the table. Inside a service panel, splitters, a maintenance dongle, a black box with a heartbeat LED. Julian flipped it from green to amber to stubborn red and freed the outer latch. A second latch stayed live. Emma asked for a port. Julian gave her one. The tablet enumerated a plain maintenance interface. No brand, no noise, just fields. A sensor map painted the room skeleton. Door magnets, motion detectors, suppression. Emma chose lies. She ticked pre-purge test, gambled on sane engineering, and typed a password a person like Dana would choose. Authorized. Vents clicked and sighed. The latch released under Mark's hand like a muscle unclenching. They didn't linger. The corridor beyond was colder by a degree and smelled of electronics. They took the service hall with the black mechanical placard and convinced a keypad to trust Dana's tablet over its own judgment. Inside, a cathedral of pipes and tanks hummed. A graded catwalk spanned the elevator bank. An access bridge crossed to Stair B. They crossed. Speakers woke. Hale's voice, warm and close without being near, occupied the ductwork. He narrated the window they had bought, the choreography they had executed, the limited meaning of both. Machinery housings blinked to life, screens showing grainy slices of an older file. Mark, years earlier, in a different concrete room, used now as pressure, not evidence. They kept moving. No one slowed for a screen. Stair B opened into cooler air. 2 private security men stepped onto the landing, posture of professionals whose orders had found them. They carried the shape of authority without showing weapons. Claire put Judge Martinez's voice into the stairwell on speaker. The carrier wave of a court order altered the arithmetic. The men stepped aside. The group climbed. The Level L service corridor ran straight to Reynolds' loading bay. The gate was half raised. The van waited with hazard lights like a promise. They had 3 lengths of hallway left when Vincent stepped out of shadow as if a column had grown eyes. Hale moved 2 steps behind him. Hands in pockets, no show of force. The pressure came from the room, not the men. Dwyer's adjournment had drained 1 clock. Vincent had wound another. The bay's far edge held 2 uniformed cops in easy conversation with building security. Favors had been called. The street beyond was beginning to draw microphones and dishes on articulated arms. Curiosity had a schedule of its own. The group didn't stop. Julian slid the van door. Claire and Emma climbed in. Mark placed his weight on the threshold and a steel clamp dropped from the rail onto the rear axle with a teeth-on-tin sound. The van bucked and stayed where it was. A second clamp bracketed the front wheel. Above them the gate motor reversed direction and the door began to descend. The geometry of the room tightened. Julian fetched a compact hydraulic spreader from a black bag and set it into the track. The tool pushed, the motor complained, the descending slab found a counter-argument and paused 6 inches off the concrete, enough air to scrape a shoulder through. One by one they did. Claire first, then Emma, scraping skin and cloth across a floor that stank of oil and brake dust, then Mark and Julian. The spreader gave up with a metal groan. The gate paid out the remaining inches fast. The bay sealed with a boom that carried into the bones of the tower. Street. Like. Sirens arced around the block. Media vans wrestled for curb. A familiar black SUV idled where it had learned patience earlier in the day. Judge Martinez's voice in Claire's ear granted an hour of judicial weather, an umbrella, not a roof. They did not run. They let the cameras see who had walked out of a private facility through a narrowing mouth and into day. Claire placed the consent order copy where lenses would find it. Mark kept it in hand long enough for a photo. Emma stood close enough to be captured, far enough to remain her own figure. The SUV's driver door opened. Margaret Dwyer stepped out in slate, unhurried. She ignored every camera until she was 3 steps from Mark. She suggested a conversation. He declined the basement and offered daylight. She accepted the metaphor, lifted her hand, and the SUV's rear door opened. Richard Hale emerged with the same careful courtesy he had worn all day. Beside him, a teenager stepped down, auburn hair, guarded eyes, familiar and impossible in this context. Thomas, Emma's brother. His wrists were free. His shoulders were set. He scanned the street and did not flinch when he found his sister. The look that moved between them was not theater. Dwyer smiled. It didn't touch anything that could be measured as warmth. She framed the next motion as negotiation. The word bent in the air. The sidewalk narrowed under pressure. Media crews craned for angle, phones rose on sticks, traffic flattened into rubbernecking noise. Julian's field of view compressed to corridors and corners. Exits ceased to be lines on plans and became distances a body could cross before a second body moved. Claire's thumb found the judge's number again without looking. The clamp on the van's axle bit into memory. The last 30 minutes rearranged themselves. ADR paper dressed as help, a door that opened 3 inches then asked for a second answer, a maintenance port that lied well enough to free a latch, a catwalk across a shaft, a judge on a line, a gate jammed by a tool the size of a book, a ruler with pearls whose building had a basement it didn't admit to maps. The pattern sharpened. When process failed to contain, architecture would attempt to. Vincent watched from behind the glass. You could not see expression through double reflections. You could feel intent as an artifact in the posture. He didn't press forward. He did not need to. He had already placed the piece he wanted the room to register. Thomas, present, unharmed, unclaimed. Emma did the arithmetic of leverage without letting it break her face. Thomas existed under a series of plausible explanations, escorted because a concern had been raised, collected because safety required alignment, present because clarity demanded proof of concern. Every rationale had been workshopped to pass in a polite room. None changed the fact. He didn't belong between a billionaire and a bored insurgent on a sidewalk lined with cameras. Her impulse was velocity. The smart move was mass. She held center. Claire finished one call and began another. Outside counsel, already filing, threaded an emergency motion for enforcement into the same docket as the TRO. No further custodial actions, no interference with corporate witnesses, no photographs of anyone under 20 without parental consent. She spoke with the cadence of someone who had learned not to give adjectives to a judge who disliked them. Mark anchored. He let the cameras see his presence without gifting them an angle that could be simplified into arrogance or plea. He did not approach Dwyer. He did not retreat toward the van. He occupied the strip of public concrete that separated marquee names from a private tower's locked mouth. The police cruiser that had nosed in earlier moved a wheel length forward, officers stepping with practiced caution. They were ready to keep order in the impartial way that left room for interpretation. How much order, whose? A message slid through the air on Emma's phone, unknown number, a line of text that had learned where to land. You bought today. Tomorrow has teeth. V. She showed Mark. He filed the sentence behind his expression. On another block face, a second van appeared. Not media. A private shuttle in a neutral wrap that meant money avoiding logos. Hale noted it without looking like he had. Dwyer presented the next frame as choice. You could set a table in plain view and still run a backroom. She posed her offer in words that would withstand a replay. Talk, daylight, stewardship, responsibility. The cameras heard civility. The architecture heard a different noun. Thomas was a door. Julian's hand hovered 2 inches wide of Emma's elbow, a cue, not a grab. Claire watched the hinge line where police and private security met. Margins shrink fastest at shared turf. Mark's weight settled on the balls of his feet, movement ready without looking coiled. The city did what cities do: fed, watched, recorded, misremembered. The most dangerous object in view was not a clamp or a gate. It was a narrative forming in real time around a debt between power and a person with less of it. Dwyer knew it. Vincent knew it. Mark had learned it young. Emma lived inside the part of it that couldn't be captured by policy. The hour Judge Martinez had given them thinned. The board had adjourned, not resigned. The SEC had opened its ear, not its mouth. The consent order sat in a folder with edges sharp enough to cut a press release. The protective custody clause would look different on the evening news than in a pleading. Tomorrow's teeth had been named. Today's breath still needed to be managed. Dwyer made the smallest motion with her fingers. Hale opened the SUV's rear door wider, not an invitation, a stage direction. Thomas stayed where he was. Emma's center didn't move. She did. A measured step. Enough to show gravity. Not enough to concede orbit. The sound in the street shifted. Sirens near, shutters clicking, the murmur of a crowd leaning in. Somewhere behind the gate, a motor engaged and disengaged as a system tested itself against a human tool it did not understand. In a sub-basement, an ADR vent cycled air through an empty room. Claire's phone buzzed. A clerk on Judge Martinez's line. A new order drafted, unsigned, waiting on a fact to be stated under penalty of perjury. She could make that fact true in a sentence. A minor is being used as leverage in a governance dispute. She asked Emma with her eyes if she wanted that truth on paper and in a record that would outlive a day. Emma answered without speaking. Yes. Mark saw it. He weighed cost against cost. He nodded. Claire inhaled to speak the sentence to the clerk. A traffic horn blasted. The media vans shifted position to clear a path that hadn't existed a second ago. The black SUV pivoted an angle. The officers took a half-step left. The sidewalk's geometry rewrote itself around a plan no one had announced out loud. Julian's head snapped toward a sound that didn't belong. A second clamp thudding metal on rubber inside the bay where no vehicle remained. A test. A warning. A metronome. Thomas looked past Dwyer and Hale and found Emma again. The guardedness cracked a degree. He opened his mouth, not to plead, not to call, but to place a word on the table of what was happening. He didn't get the word out. The SUV's rear door closed with a gentle thud. A matching door on the other side opened into the street, out of frame for most cameras. A body slid from shadow to sidewalk with the unremarkable smoothness of a person executing a practiced, lawful thing. Vincent's text had been truthful in the way lies prefer, teeth tomorrow. He had one last play for the minute that still belonged to him. Emma's phone buzzed a second time. Same number. 2 words this time, not threat, instruction. Choose venue. She understood before she finished reading. The offer was a trap and also a map. Private negotiation in a public visible. A move inside a move. Dwyer had built a lever out of Thomas. Vincent had built a camera out of the sidewalk. Either way, refusal could be made to look like abandonment. Acceptance could be edited into concession. The judge's clerk said ready in Claire's ear. Claire said minor present, pressure applied, and the clerk said filed. The new motion popped into existence, not a shield, but a blade. The police officers, real ones, turned their heads toward the radio chatter that would now include words like minor, leverage, order. Their body language altered by a shade. Dwyer heard the same traffic, not through the radio, through the way people started to watch her differently. Hale saw the angle close and opened another, a tiny gesture toward the shuttle that had arrived without logo. 2 steps and Thomas would be inside. The entire scene balanced on a thumbnail. Mark moved first. Not fast. Enough. He stepped so that his shoulder and Emma's were squarely aligned. Visibility gave shape to protection. The black SUV's engine idled a register higher. The shuttle's signal clicked on. Judge Martinez's line went quiet as the clerk waited for a new verb. The media lenses found a framing they liked. And everything went dark. When the light returned, it wasn't the clean daylight of a city street. It had a strange amber cast, like the scene was being viewed through an old filter. The noise from the crowd had dropped to an unnatural low, the ambient roar of reporters and bystanders fading as if someone had turned down the volume knob on the entire block. Cameras were still pointed in every direction, lenses glinting, but the live feeds were dead. Reporter tablets blinked NO signal. Cell phones were useless. Every device in the immediate area had gone dark. Mark recognized the tactic instantly. Vincent hadn't cut the power. He'd cut the light in the way it mattered most, public visibility. Whatever happened next wouldn't be broadcast. It would be retold later, edited, framed however Vincent wanted. The shift in energy was immediate. The police officers stationed along the barricades were still there, but their focus had subtly changed. They weren't facing the crowd anymore. They were watching the players on the inside. Several stepped back, opening narrow lanes into the cordon. And through those gaps came men in dark suits, no badges, no visible affiliation, moving with the fluid coordination of people working from the same script. The pressure on the crowd was invisible but relentless, bodies gently but firmly redirected, groups broken apart. Emma found herself pushed a few steps toward Thomas without realizing it. Julian moved to close the space between them, but a heavy arm hooked around his shoulder and steered him toward the curb. Claire was swallowed into a crescent of black suits before she could pivot. Mark felt the tide turning against him. The press of bodies was guiding him toward the edge of the controlled zone, cutting him off from Emma and the boy. Each route he tried closed before he could take 2 steps. A black SUV eased up to the curb, its tinted rear door cracked open. A man's voice, low and smooth, came from just behind his shoulder. "Mr. Reynolds, let them handle it. They'll make sure everyone stays safe." Safe. A word that meant nothing here. 2 blocks away, under the building's skin in the hidden sublevel, Vincent sat in front of a control wall, multiple feeds showing every angle of the street, each tagged with a small blinking icon. Mark, Emma, Thomas, Julian, Claire. The digital map tracked them like pieces on a chessboard, each one being nudged into a new position. Vincent leaned back, taking in the symmetry of his trap. Emma's wrist buzzed. She glanced down and froze. The message was audio only, playing the moment she touched it, Vincent's voice, close and deliberate. "Choose, Emma. Go with Thomas, or go with Mark. You can't have both." She looked up. Thomas was 10 feet away now, a tall man's hand clamped on his shoulder. The boy wasn't fighting, but his left hand curled into a tight fist at his side. Not fear, signal. She took a step toward him, but the 2 suits flanking her moved like a pair of sliding doors, blocking the lane without touching her. Mark was now 30 feet away, a physical wall between him and the others. The SUV door opened wider, an unspoken command to get in. He didn't. The shuttle appeared from nowhere, a nondescript white van with dark windows, parked half a block down. Its side door slid open before it had even stopped rolling. One of the men steering Thomas shifted, guiding him that way. As the boy moved, he turned his head just enough for Emma to see his lips shape a single word. She couldn't hear it, but the formation of the mouth was clear. A name. She pushed forward, but the van was already rolling. By the time Julian grabbed her arm to keep her from stepping into traffic, it had accelerated into a convoy of 3 other vehicles moving in perfect lockstep, each one shielding it from any pursuit. Within seconds, it was gone. Mark broke free of the last barrier just in time to see the shuttle vanish into the city grid. Someone bumped into him, shoving something into his hand as they passed. He glanced down, a folded sheet of paper, creased 3 times. Inside, in tight block letters, "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Sublevel 3. Come alone." In the sublevel control room, Vincent's eyes lingered on the feed of the white van disappearing. He didn't smile. This wasn't victory yet, it was positioning. Thomas wasn't just a hostage now. He was a key piece in something larger, a lever Vincent could pull in any direction he chose. The blackout lifted without ceremony. Cell signals returned, cameras started streaming again, reporters' voices flared back into life, shouting questions into the chaos. But whatever they'd seen, whatever they thought they'd captured, had a hole right where the most important events had happened. Vincent had just bought himself narrative control. Mark crossed to Emma, holding out the note. She read it once, her jaw tightening. Behind her, Claire emerged from the cordon, phone already pressed to her ear, relaying details to a judge's clerk before the trail went cold. Julian scanned the rooftops and side streets, but the shuttle was long gone. Emma's phone buzzed again. No text, no words, just a photograph. Thomas sat in a bare metal room, a single table in front of him. On the table lay a sealed black envelope. In the corner of the frame was a timestamp, 8:59 a.m. 1 minute before Vincent's meeting time. The city woke to a thin, metallic light and the grim taste of last night's headlines. By 7:30 a.m., the story had already bent into competing shapes. A board in responsible transition, a CEO cooperating with interim oversight, a nameless safety concern involving a young male relative of a key witness. The only facts that held were the photos, a locked gate, a hydraulic spreader, for figures sliding under daylight by inches. Claire spent the early hour turning paper into leverage. The temporary restraining order from Judge Martinez became a ladder to a second filing, an emergency motion to bar custodial measures against any Reynolds employee or family member, to force preservation of all building logs at Marlowe Tower, and to compel a compliance check by city fire officials at the premises named in yesterday's pleadings. She timed the filings like a metronome, each one hitting an inbox 5 minutes after the last, enough to keep a clerk watching and a judge awake. Julian moved in parallel, taking the gray hours to map the outer skeleton of Marlowe Tower in ways floor plans never show. Dead corners on cameras, loading bays with misaligned tracks, the cadence of revolving doors that stuck every 10th turn. He walked in a delivery jacket and a hard hat, then walked again in a fleece and a ball cap, memorizing patterns that didn't change with costumes. By 8:20, he knew where a person could disappear for 30 seconds and where a person could be seen for exactly 12 and not a second more. Emma said very little and watched everything. The photo of Thomas, time-stamped 8:59, a black envelope on a metal table, lived on the inside of her eyelids. She noticed the vent pattern on the wall, the spacing between the table legs, the hairline crack in the upper right corner of the cinder block where the paint job had bubbled and split. She compared it to a maintenance rendering Claire's team subpoenaed at dawn. Sublevel 3 had 4 consultation rooms, identical except for the vent pattern. Thomas's vent matched East Wing, Room 2. Mark didn't rehearse. He had already done too much of that in the last 24 hours. At 8:40, he shaved and put on a navy suit that didn't read retreat, a white shirt with a collar that sat right without tie. He tucked a lapel clip in place, indistinguishable from yesterday's, and slid a plain, unbranded pen into his inside pocket where no magnet would care. He left his phone with Claire. "You're not going alone," Emma said. "Not a question." "I'm going in by myself," he said. "That's different." She held his gaze long enough to make sure he understood the weight of 2 words, Thomas first. He nodded. Julian said nothing and tightened the laces on his boots. They entered Marlowe Tower separately, no badges, no announcements, just the patience of people who had decided what hour mattered. Claire took the public lobby like a lawyer with an appointment and asked to see the property manager about yesterday's safety incident, flashing an order number with a judge's name on it. Julian slid into a service corridor and vanished. Emma waited outside 2 buildings down, copying nothing and recording everything through the reflection of a coffee shop window. At 8:57, Mark stepped into the freight elevator alone and pressed no buttons. The car chose for him. Sublevel 3 blinked alive on a screen that wasn't meant to show that floor to civilians. The ride down felt like stepping through a peeled photograph. No vibration, no chatter, just the shrug of machines doing exactly what they were told. The doors opened to a hallway that didn't pretend to be a lobby. Painted cinderblock, waxed floor, cool air. The signs were minimalistic and legal. Consultation suites, mechanical, delivery. A camera sat in the corner behind smoked glass, indifferent. Hale stood under the camera as if he had been there all morning and would be there all week. He didn't extend a hand. This way. They walked past an open office with 2 desks and a laminated evacuation map on the wall. Mark didn't slow, but his eyes went to the emergency symbols. Pre-purge. Damper release. Safe egress routes. He filed the icons with the same attention he'd give line items in a quarterly report. They passed East 1, East 2. A red light over East 2 glowed steady. Inside, Thomas sat at a table that had been bolted to the floor. The black envelope still lay unopened in front of him. 2 men stood with the posture of users, not owners, contractors, not cops, arms loose, weapons invisible because they didn't need to be shown. Behind glass, a camera peered through a slot the size of a postcard. It clicked once like a throat being cleared. Door, Hale said. It unlatched on a magnet and opened soundlessly. Mark took in the ratios he cared about: distance to boy, distance to exit, positions of men, number of magnets in the frame. He didn't move beyond the threshold. Open it, Hale said, nodding at the envelope. Thomas didn't look at Hale. He looked at Mark and then at the envelope like a person deciding which known variable was less dangerous. He broke the seal. Inside was a single flat plastic card and a folded sheet of paper. The card was the color of something governments issue when they want everyone to know it's official. The paper was blank on the side facing up. Read it, Hale said. Thomas turned the page over. 1 sentence, printed in a lawyer's font, sat dead center. Take the card to room South Archive 3. Do not hand it to anyone. Hale stepped aside like a man who had just revealed something generous. Insurance, he said. For everyone. Mark knew a transfer when he saw one. Not of custody. Of responsibility. A boy carrying a key that opened tomorrow, under the eye of a system that would decide if he got to use it. He didn't nod. He didn't object. He measured the edges of a trap that wore the shape of a choice. Come alone, Hale reminded him, as if the note had required reinforcement. He checked his watch. You have 7 minutes. Upstairs, the day behaved like any weekday, which is to say it pretended nothing unusual was happening. Claire watched that pretense and broke it, presenting the property manager with a copy of the TRO and the emergency motion regarding minors. She asked to speak with building counsel. She asked again, more slowly, and said the words on the record. A maintenance badge appeared from a back office as if conjured by weather. 3 minutes later a fire inspector with a city patch and a tired face approached, surprised to be needed this early. Claire did not give him coffee. She gave him an order number with a judge's name and the word immediate. 2 floors down, Emma crossed the street and slipped into the alley between Marlowe and a glass tower that reflected the first building like a twin. Julian met her at a steel door painted the color of compliance. The keypad looked newer than the wall. He nodded at her sleeve. She held Dana's tablet close and held her breath. The tablet chirped once, and the keypad changed color. The door clicked open. They entered a tangle of narrow corridors and utility shelves that smelled like hot dust. Julian moved with the economy of a person counting steps. Right, left, straight, down. Emma matched his pace and kept her eyes on the marks she'd made on a folded map, tiny dots where vent patterns on the maintenance blueprint matched the vent behind Thomas's shoulder in the photo. East wing, room 2. 2 more turns and a stair. Sublevel 3's east corridor looked like the drawing. 4 doors, each with a small red light above. East 2 glowed. A shadow of 2 men passed across the frosted glass panel. Emma didn't look at the window. She looked at the jamb, finding the magnet seams by eye. A voice on a small speaker near the ceiling crackled with a tone reserved for emergencies and tests. Fire department courtesy check. Not a drill. A courtesy check was a pre-inspection that building managers requested when they wanted to show compliance on paper and control optics in practice. The timing wasn't an accident. Claire's filing had not just found a clerk, it had found a schedule. In the room, Mark spoke for the first time that morning. 4 words, measured, non-negotiable. He walks with me. Hale didn't bother hiding the smirk. He walks, he said. You follow. It looked like concession. It wasn't. It put Thomas ahead. Within reach of a door a stranger could open from the other side. It forced Mark to choose between guard and boy every second after the first step. The men in the corners repositioned to make the point obvious. Thomas stood. He put the card in his pocket and held the page in his hand like he was carrying a menu. He didn't look at anyone. He walked to the door and stopped, waiting for the magnet to release. The ridiculous politeness of it, an electronic courtesy in a room that had none, made the hair stand up on Mark's forearms. The red light above the door flicked to amber. The magnet sighed. The door swung outward into the hallway. Thomas stepped through. Mark followed, 1 pace back, body turned to put shoulders and hip between the boy and anyone else. South Archive 3, Hale said, pointing toward a corridor that smelled like cardboard and old air. He didn't escort. He didn't need to. 2 men fell in behind at a professional distance and kept their weapons in their jackets and their eyes on the spaces that mattered. They walked. Mechanical humming underscored everything. A ventilation fan somewhere down the line clicked on and off with a rhythm that would get under a person's skin if they were forced to sit in it for hours. The concrete floor had been sealed and rewaxed until it shone like a picture of a floor. Emergency route placards sat behind plexiglass at intervals, each with icons for purge, damper, latch release. Mark counted doors without looking like he was counting. Mechanical, storage, Archive South 1, Archive South 2, and then a door with no name at all, new hardware gleaming against tired paint. Archive South 3 was 1 more down. No glass panel. No handle either, just a badge plate and a round, keyhole-less puck that promised biometrics. On the surface, the street filled with a different sort of attention. A city fire inspector signed a clipboard and asked to be shown suppression systems on sublevel 2 and 3. The property manager made calls that should have happened yesterday. Claire stood at his shoulder and watched every checkbox get checked. She didn't smile. She did ask him to initial the time of each step. Emma reached the corner before Archive South 3 and stopped. She and Julian had come through a service run that exited 6 feet to the left of the door. The wall opposite was bare. The ceiling carried a narrow camera lane. The magnet plate in the doorframe was larger than the others, a double latch. On the latch's outer edge, someone had left a tool mark, tiny, crescent-shaped. Human error. Human chance. Emma pressed her palm to the plate, felt for temperature. Warmer than the steel around it. The magnet was pulling hard. In the room 3 doors back, a speaker clucked and a pleasant building voice announced a suppression test courtesy purge in 2 minutes. It was scripted language for we are about to move air the way the manual says we should when life is at stake. It also meant some doors will behave like doors that want people to live. Hale's calm lived in certainty. He checked his watch again. Thomas reached for the badge plate with the plastic card. He stopped half an inch before contact. He was 17. He had the face of a person who had been asked to carry a box he hadn't chosen. He didn't look back at Mark. He looked forward at something he did not know and decided not to give it everything. He lowered his hand. Now, Hale said. The first real slip in the voice, an edge. Thomas didn't move. In the ceiling, something clicked. A hush moved down the hall like a ripe wind. The damper on the far end opened a fraction. The red lights over East 1 and East 3 flicked to amber. The double latch on Archive South 3 vibrated with a new frequency. Julian stood behind Emma, seeing gaps more than objects. He measured the distance from Thomas's wrist to the badge plate and from Emma's shoulder to the magnet seam. He put his hand on Emma's forearm, not to stop, to tune. Emma slid across the last 2 feet of floor and put the tablet against the badge plate. The plate recognized a familiar MAC address from a device that had been in and out of this building all week and chirped like a house pet. The double latch demagnetized a hair. Julian wedged a sliver of steel into the seam, and the latch demagnetized another hair. Thomas moved. He didn't swipe the card. He pressed the bottom edge of the plastic flat against the seam where Julian's tool sat, levering. The magnet let go like a taut muscle forced to stretch. The door came open an inch. Then two. The two men behind stepped forward. Mark pivoted, shoulder first, and crowded the nearer man toward the opposite wall without making contact. The second's hand went into his jacket and came out empty except for a palm opened in a warning. None of them raised a voice. They didn't need to. The building did it for them. A polite female announced that a pre-purge cycle had begun. Vince exhaled. Emma pulled the door just wide enough for a body. Thomas slipped through sideways. Mark slid in behind, back to the corridor, making himself the second latch. Emma followed, and Julian was the last, hands closing the door but not letting it relock. Archive South 3 was a long, narrow room with rolling shelves and a single terminal. The air tasted like old paper and disinfectant. Against the back wall, at waist height, sat a locker the size of a small microwave with a keyed slot that matched the plastic card in Thomas's hand. He inserted the card. The locker door popped open with a quiet bond snap. Inside lay a drive in a black aluminum case the size of a wallet and a sheet of paper with one line on it: "Deliver to council. Do not copy. Do not transmit. Physical chain only. Evidence, not ransom." A vault in a building that pretended it didn't have a basement feeding a system that pretended it didn't know what custody meant. The drive was not for Mark. It was where it could be found by someone who could put it in a record. Vincent liked verbs. So did Claire. "Time," Julian said. Thomas tucked the drive inside his jacket. He didn't ask who counsel was. He had met Claire. They turned toward the door. The magnet had rearmed quietly, persistent as sleep. On the far end of the corridor, Hale's comm had finished cracking. The courtesy purge ticked to its last seconds. The fire inspector upstairs signed the last box and said, "Let's go see it then." Julian slipped the tool back into the seam and felt the magnet's pulse through metal. Too strong. He looked up. The ceiling held a maintenance panel with a thumb latch that someone didn't bother to repaint after the last wrench. He popped it. Above the panel, a manual release for the door assembly sat like a secret for people who still read manuals. He reached, twisted, and the magnet sighed again. The door opened. They moved as a unit into the corridor. Thomas first, Mark behind him, Emma at Thomas's shoulder, Julian last, closing. The two men who had been escorting had made room. They did not try to block. They did not help. They watched with the alert stillness of people waiting for the next cue on a stage that was being rewritten live. At the far end, Hale stood green-lit under a sign that said "Exit" like a promise put in writing by someone who never had to use it. He had one hand at his ear. He was listening to a voice that wasn't in the corridor. "Up," Julian said. "Stair A. Fire inspectors will be at the suppression panel in 1 minute. Doors will have to stay unlocked for the walkthrough." They hit stair A and began to climb. The air changed. More building than basement now. Steps became the metronome. At the first landing, a door opened onto a hall where a city patch moved in a gray shirt. The inspector looked surprised to see them and immediately pretended not to be. "Clear this route," the inspector said to no one in particular. The words had the weight of a formality that had survived wars. The route didn't clear. It changed shape. A side door near the top of the flight opened to a service hall, lights warm, floor clean, the sound of public space very close. The magnet on that door didn't resist. The hallway turned left toward a bank of elevators with mirrors that made the space look twice as wide. Claire stood at the far end, a folder under her arm, two building managers on either side of her like punctuation. She didn't hurry. She didn't wave. She held the position of a person who'd been told to meet a fire inspector at sublevel 2 and had instead found the reason for the inspection walking toward her. Thomas reached her first. He didn't speak. He lifted the black aluminum case from inside his jacket and placed it on the folder. "Physical chain," Emma said. Fewer words than needed, enough to make the point. Claire slid the drive into a canvas envelope, sealed it with 2 strips of tamper tape, and wrote the time across both in block numbers that faced the camera by accident on purpose. "Out," Julian said. "Now." They made the L level again. The loading bay held no van this morning, and no clamp descended from the gate rail. The door rose on its track like a thing trying very hard to look ordinary. Street air reached them with the smell of bakery and diesel. News vans had learned patience overnight and were parked in a stagger that meant they had found their lines and would not be leaving. They stepped into light. The moment lasted less than a breath. A different sound rose from behind, metal skittering against metal, a rapid clatter like a chain being pulled over teeth. Julian turned in time to see a maintenance elevator at the far end of the service hall open on a frame where a car should have been. Not an empty shaft. Something worse for a body, a buffer pit with a ladder and 10 feet of nothing. Two men in jackets that matched the ones from East 2 stepped out of the shadows beside the elevator and looked at Mark, then at Thomas, then at the door Claire had just stepped through with a drive. Hale's voice arrived ahead of his body. "Plan F," he said to someone not present, and the maintenance elevator's door tried to close on air, failed, and stayed stuck half a foot open, an invitation posed like a mistake. Emma felt the direction of the scene turn. The trap wasn't the shaft. It was the optics of a stumble. A boy near a hole. A CEO moving too fast. A narrative ready to be hung around a fall like a coat. She put her hand on Thomas's shoulder and kept him 2 steps from any edge. Julian's body closed the angle that looked most like regret waiting to happen. Mark took a half step the other way, forcing any camera to keep all of them in the same frame or lose the story entirely. Claire didn't stop moving. The canvas envelope had already left her hand and entered a messenger bag held open by an attorney whose nameplates had been attached to the motion since dawn. Chain of custody moved forward by inches and names. The building's PA chirped back on, different voice, different script. Facility test concluding. Please resume normal operations. The sound of something being reset when it had never been set properly to begin with. The scene held for 3 beats. Enough time for a person to say a name. Enough time for a judge to see a fact in her head that would become ink. Enough time for a man like Vincent to decide whether to push the piece in his hand off the board or back to his side. Traffic on the street surged and dipped like a wave reconsidering the shore. The city breathed around them. The white van from yesterday did not appear. The black SUV did, nosing into the curb like a memory. The SUV's rear door opened for 3 inches and stopped. Someone inside held it there, not offering, not threatening, just reminding, the door exists. Mark didn't look at it. He looked at Emma and Thomas and then at Claire, who had already turned away from the building to walk the drive into a car with a different set of plates and a different set of obligations. He exhaled a breath he'd been holding since 8:59 and let it turn into a word without sound, move. They moved, into public air with public rules. Behind them, in a room with no windows, a man took his hands off a console and pressed one palm to his sternum, as if measuring his heart's distance from certainty. Vincent had not lost. He had learned what it would cost to win. On Emma's phone, a new message arrived from the number that liked to speak in short sentences. Not a threat. A statement. Teeth, tomorrow. But today you took something. V. She didn't show it to anyone. She deleted it. The meaning remained. They reached the corner. The attorney with the messenger bag slid into a car that would move in lanes no private shuttle could shade. Claire climbed into the rear seat and closed the door. The wheels rolled. The case left the block. For 1 second, the sidewalk was only 4 people and a morning and a decision not to be bent. Then the 2 men who had hovered at the maintenance elevator stepped into the lane like normal pedestrians with places to be and didn't look back. Emma held Thomas's face between her hands and saw that his eyes were clear. He nodded once, a small movement that belonged to the boy who had pressed a plastic card into a magnet seam at the exact right second. She let go and looked at Mark. The light changed. Traffic shifted. Somewhere a siren spoke, and elsewhere a judge picked up a pen. The camera found them again, a lens swallowing 4 figures in a city that had itself to attend to. The story would be rewritten a dozen times by dinner. Parts of it would be wrong. One part would not. The drive was gone to a place where machines made evidence into obligations. They turned away from Marlowe Tower and the air it had learned to control and walked into a day none of them had planned. Each step measured against a clock that had started counting down at 9 o'clock and would not be polite again. Morning accelerated instead of settling. By 9:40 a.m., the drive sat inside a tamper-evident envelope on a conference table 3 blocks from the courthouse, 2 paralegals documenting chain of custody with timestamps, initials, and photographs. A 3rd recorded ambient video of the room from a fixed angle that captured nothing dramatic and everything essential. Who touched what, when, and how. Claire moved paper like a surgeon moves instruments. No wasted arc. The TRO remained the scaffolding. A fresh motion layered over it sought a protective order for 2 specific witnesses and a preservation order for all digital systems touching Marlowe Tower's access controls, suppression logs, and private elevator routes. City Fire's courtesy check became leverage for a full inspection, A subpoena followed the inspector down the stairs like a shadow with a file stamp. Julian mapped soft corners around the courthouse the way he had mapped service stairs, which sidewalks dead-ended into bottlenecks, where unmarked cars liked to idle, how close a person could get to the loading dock before a uniform asked a question. He didn't expect violence. He expected convenience to be weaponized. Emma stayed with Thomas in a room with 2 windows and a door that latched but did not lock. She kept the conversation practical. Water, food, phone off, sit near the interior wall. He watched the door and then the glass, not because he planned to run, but because the habit had already formed. He had slept 4 hours across 12 and still showed up in his eyes. He asked for nothing. He didn't need to. He understood the economy of the moment. At 10:05, the envelope moved under camera to a forensic table. An independent examiner, contracted before dawn, broke the tamper tape with a tool designed to leave a signature. Gloves, photos, serial numbers. The black aluminum case opened to reveal a solid-state drive with a manufacturer's label that meant the vendor's logbooks could be subpoenaed, and a second sticker with a modest barcode that did not, at first glance, mean anything at all. The examiner imaged the drive using a write blocker, duplicating bits to a fresh device while calculating hashes that would make the copy provably identical in court. The original stayed visible in frame, its position marked with tape and a number. Everything at once felt procedural and irreversible. The first directory tree resolved at 10:22. Simple names, numbered folders, index files pointing to deeper structures, access events, physical, security lanes, overrides, ADR packages, board proxy calendars. A separate, smaller directory wore a name that avoided words and settled for numbers, 0612. Claire read the number and knew what it wanted her to remember, a date. She opened 0612 on the imaged copy, not the original. Inside, 3 files, a PDF, a video, a text ledger. The PDF held sign-off sheets and maintenance schedules around a safety test at a secondary facility, each signature legible, each timestamp too neat. The video was a composite of 2 feeds showing a purge cycle that should have lasted 2 minutes and did last 2 minutes, except the door in the frame opened during the first 20 seconds and stayed open long enough for the cameras to document an outcome the sign-off sheets never would. The ledger contained entries with internal IDs beside 4 familiar shells, Stonebridge, Marlowe Tower LLC, and 2 custodians that had shown up on quarterly disclosures in footnotes no one read except auditors and predators. The examiner didn't narrate. He noted. Claire wrote the citation line she would need when a judge asked where, and when, and who, and then wrote a second set for the question judges usually ask last, why wasn't this disclosed? At 10:40, the firm's messenger departed with the imaged copy in a sealed pouch and a declaration template taped to the outside. The original stayed in the room. 2 more photos. 2 more signatures. Upstairs, the courthouse assigned a courtroom number and a judge's calendar time, 1:30 p.m., expedited. Attorneys adjusted ties and tabs. Clerks moved files from one metal cart to a different metal cart that looked exactly the same. A marshal confirmed that no one would argue with a witness under 20 being escorted through a staff corridor rather than the main hall. Claire texted done to a number only Mark used and then turned her phone face down on the table to keep the next hour from owning her. Marlowe Tower pivoted from quiet to performative compliance. Fire inspectors in gray shirts and city patches walked sublevel 2 and 3. A building manager explained dampers and purge cycles without understanding either. Suppression panels lit in friendly colors. Doors opened and stayed open when asked. A clipboard fluttered from hand to hand and back again, lines filling with ink that meant, in theory, that what had happened yesterday could not happen today. On a different level, in an office that had windows and a view that made discipline feel earned, Vincent watched his own floor plans appear on municipal tablets and listened to Hale narrate the optics. Compliance being displayed at exactly the right hour to please exactly the right oversight while exactly the wrong questions were being asked 2 blocks away. He rerouted his attention to where the story still breathed. Markets at 11 o'clock had begun to price rumor. An outlet with a taste for drama published a piece that framed Mark as embattled CEO negotiates behind closed doors while board seeks stability, a sentence that looked neutral and felt like a verdict if you wanted one. Another ran a photo of Emma on the sidewalk, clipped so that only the hand on her shoulder was visible, the face out of frame. A third hinted at old safety issues, with no specifics and a whisper of an old video in which a younger Mark shoved a man against a wall. The article did not link to the clip. It didn't need to. Memory is a kind of link. At 11:25, a junior at a digital desk received a direct message with a file labeled Archive Unnext PDF and a note. For context, the file did not come from a known account. It did not pass through the outlet servers. The junior almost opened it, then remembered the training video with the cheerful man and the grim slide about bad things that look like good tips. He forwarded it to legal. Legal forwarded it to IT. IT opened it in a sandbox that had never been connected to anything living. The file was an index, not a payload. It listed names of folders and their hash strings, meaningless to a casual observer, crucial to the person who would soon stand in front of a judge and argue that the drive being discussed in court matched the drive that had fed a board for months. At 12:05, the examiner finished the first pass. Claire signed the declaration to attach with emotion, not for drama but for structure. She did not claim conclusions. She claimed facts, a device, a chain, the presence of files with names that corresponded to lines in a ledger no one had shown the SEC. She sent the packet electronically and then sent a runner with a physical copy because printers still possess a kind of magic that email refuses to learn. Julian found a vantage point over the courthouse steps that preserved distance and provided angles. He watched the sidewalk three ways, for men who walked like they were waiting for a signal, for cars that idled like they were being paid to stand still, for faces he didn't know doing things that people who don't belong don't think to do, like look up when birds move. Emma used the hour to replace adrenaline with process. She reorganized the last 12 hours in her head as a timeline with verbs and times rather than a list of images with hertz. She found her breath again. She checked on Thomas without saying his name and texted a grocery list to a neighbor because acts of ordinary life have the same weight as affidavits when you are measuring whether you are still a person rather than a piece. Mark stayed out of photos and in range. He didn't walk the courthouse steps. He didn't sit in the firm's waiting room. He found a room without windows and the kind of chair people buy when they need to feel like they are doing something even when they are only thinking. He read the drive's index, not the files. He didn't need to see the worst part yet to prepare for it. There is a cost to knowing and a cost to not knowing. He chose the one he could carry for 2 more hours. By 1:15, the air had thinned into anticipation. The courtroom door opened. A bailiff explained phones to people who already knew about phones. A court reporter arranged keystrokes in her head. Claire took the front bench with outside counsel, the envelope with the imaged copy in her bag, the declaration on the table, her name under the words "I declare" under penalty of perjury. The judge entered at 1:32. She was the opposite of theatrical. The room adjusted to her metabolism. Counsel introduced themselves for the record. The judge read the captions and then looked at Claire. The first question was the first question anyone sane would ask: what changed since yesterday? Claire answered in nouns and numbers, a device in custody, an index that matched internal naming conventions inside entities controlled by a board member's family office, a video showing a safety system failing while paperwork claimed the opposite. No adjectives. No throat clearing. She put the words protective custody clause and consent order next to each other without dramatic pause and let the juxtaposition do the work. Opposing counsel stood when it was his turn and described the last 24 hours as unfortunate miscommunications, and an abundance of caution, and provisional arrangements. He did not use the words kidnapping or basement. He used the words safety 6 times. He suggested the court not be swept into theatrics by an opportunistic reading of compliance. The judge asked for the device. Claire said the original remained in a controlled room and the court had an imaged copy, accompanied by hashes. The judge read the numbers out loud the way a careful person reads a serial number on a flight check. She asked if the opposition contested authenticity. The opposition said they had not yet had time to review. The judge said time was a resource they had spent elsewhere and that the court would proceed anyway. She granted the preservation order. She expanded the TRO into an injunction that bound not just named parties, but agents and anyone acting in concert. She ordered Marlowe Tower's sublevels open to city inspection with cameras recording and logs printing contemporaneously. She forbade any custodial measures involving any Reynolds employee, contractor, or family member without a signed court order. She set a 9 a.m. conference for tomorrow and suggested, in the kind of tone that makes people adjust schedules, that any person thinking of visiting her courtroom attempt sleep. Outside, cameras waited. They always do. Claire exited without a statement. Words would be noise compared to the paper the court had signed. News moved. Not fast enough to beat rumor, but fast enough to change it. The word injunction spread into 4th paragraphs. The photograph of the gate with the spreader got paired with a line about preservation order for all access systems. A clip of a uniformed fire inspector scanning a panel appeared with a caption that did not say raid and did not need to. Vincent adjusted. He did not scramble. He rarely did. He told Hale to stop trying to win hours and start counting costs. Hale recited a list: decreased board appetite for bravado, increased regulator attention, an opponent whose chain of custody would survive discovery. Vincent listened and then told him to make 2 calls. One to a fund with a taste for disorder and one to a PR shop that understood how to build a background narrative that feels like context. If the legal door closed for the afternoon, there were still corridors with less light. At 2:40, an alert crossed a market desk that wasn't supposed to be watching legal filings. A short note whispered that governance instability made asset rationalization likely. The stock shivered. No plunge. A tremor. Enough to make 2 smaller funds call their brokers. Enough to make Callahan look at a chart on a phone and breathe out through his nose. Emma walked Thomas out a side entrance under a low sky that offered rain and delivered nothing. They didn't head home. They went to a different address with a different buzzer, one registered to a church charity with an upstairs office and a lock that had been updated more recently than the copier. The receptionist nodded without asking names. The room had a couch, a table, 2 bottles of water, and a view of a brick wall. It felt like a pause. She let Thomas sit without talking. He didn't. He found words that were not about fear. He described the seams of doors and the way magnets sound when you put your ear close, and the fucking politeness of a building voice that tells you where to go like it cares whether you trip on the stairs. He apologized for the word. She told him he could use worse. He didn't. He was not that kind of kid. At 3:10, Claire received a text with an image she had wanted and not wanted, a still from sublevel 2, Hale and Dwyer in a corridor, time-stamped, the frame capturing the moment a door that had been marked staff opened into a room labeled nothing at all. It wasn't proof of a specific act. It was the kind of picture that, paired with a paragraph, closes the gap between suspicion and structure. She forwarded it to outside counsel and then sat for 1 full second with her eyes closed because allowing a win the width of a thumb feels like a luxury when you are counting losses the size of buildings. By late afternoon, the building inspection turned from show to work. A defect list formed in real time: 1 non-functioning damper sensor, 2 mislabeled push bars, a fire door that stuck closed if you breathed wrong after a purge. None of it theatrical. All of it relevant. The inspector initialed each line as if initialing stood between a city and a hole. The board fractured quietly. No resignations. No speeches. A proxy called another proxy who didn't answer, and an assistant told a CEO emeritus that he had a conflict at 6 and could not make drinks. Dwyer did not call Vincent. She let Hale translate weather into calendar. He told her tomorrow at 9 would not be ours. She said tomorrow at 9 would be hers eventually. He didn't argue. He almost never did. At 5:20, the forensic examiner called Claire back into the room and pointed to a folder she hadn't opened yet. ADR packages held templates and 1 finished file with a signature in a hand Claire recognized from other documents. Not Mark's. A different CEO. A consent order signed 6 months ago in a different building, with a similar clause about protective custody, accompanied by transfer papers that moved interim authority smoothly to a committee that had happened to include a seat occupied by someone with a family office that owned Marlowe Tower. The names mattered less than the pattern. This was not a one-off. This was a process. The judge's clerk accepted an emergency supplement at 5:42 and delayed bedtime by an hour for someone who had already missed 1 night's sleep. The word pattern entered the docket in an understated sentence that would carry weight that headlines would miss. Counsel for the other side wrote a response that was aggressive and careful, the legal equivalent of a smile that shows teeth and insists on civility. Evening should have diluted the day. It didn't. Lights found faces. People went home and then didn't. Restaurants filled with conversations about markets and optics and the cost of calling someone's bluff when that someone can buy the room you're sitting in. A phone pinged and then didn't. A server rack hummed. A copy finished. The original drive went back into the black case and then into a safe that had not been used for a decade, its combination changed at 6:03 and written nowhere. Mark and Emma met in a quiet kitchen behind the charity's office. A window unit air conditioner rattled. A clock ticked like a metronome that someone had never learned to turn off. He poured water and handed it to her, then another to Thomas. No one tried to say it's over. They had learned to stop making sentences that big. He asked Emma for facts and she gave them: inspector findings, judge's orders, what Thomas had seen, what the examiner had confirmed, what Claire had filed. He told her what he had seen on sublevel 3 without varnish. Neither tried to protect the other from the worst edges except where anger could not move anything forward. At 7:10, the charity's receptionist knocked and slid an envelope under the door because she had been told to touch nothing that wasn't already accounted for. No return address. The seal looked mechanical rather than licked. Emma opened it with a butter knife because the kitchen had no letter opener and knives are knives as long as they have edges. Inside lay a small, plastic access card identical to the one Thomas had used at Archive South 3 and a paper strip with a single line. Tonight. 11:30 p.m. Sublevel M. Alone. Return what you took. There was no signature. It did not need one. Emma placed the card on the table and did not move her hand away from it for a slow count of 5. Thomas looked at the plastic and then at the clock and then at her. He didn't ask to go. He already knew the answer. Mark read the line and then read it again, as if the second pass might reveal a second meaning. It didn't. Claire arrived 12 minutes later with new paper and old coffee. She saw the card and the strip and let her shoulders register what her face did not. Options arranged themselves on the table like place settings. Ignore, escalate, swap, bait, replace. None were clean. Some were wrong. The day darkened. The city changed color. A different kind of camera came out. Headlights through moving fences across walls. The building that had made a habit of acting like a person who doesn't admit wrongdoing hummed at a nighttime frequency that says maintenance and means control. They made a plan that relied less on courage than on geometry. Emma would not go alone, but she would appear to. That is sometimes what the word means, properly supported. The access card would be the same, the door would be the same, the room would not. Sublevel M had multiple ADR suites. The door with the magnet would expect a MAC address it knew. It would get one. The table seam would expect to control the latch. It would not. The vent would expect to move air. It would move sound. Julian built a map of where people would be who needed to be 2 seconds away without being visible. Stairwells, utility closets, spaces between spaces. Claire wrote an email to the court that did not name the event but documented the receipt of a new card and its handwriting and timestamp because facts are cheaper to own when you claim them first. At 9 o'clock, the judge's clerk replied with a sentence that did not authorize anything and did not warn against it and did remind counsel that her courtroom opened at 9 tomorrow and that contempt can attach to acts that look like cleverness after the fact. Claire read it twice, then put her phone face down again and left it on the counter because there are acts you do with your hands and there are acts you do with your attention, and attention is the rarer commodity. At 10:20, a car without logos idled a block from Marlowe Tower. A person inside watched a door that had been used by maintenance, and then by men who pretended to be maintenance, and then by a boy who had been asked to carry a key. The person inside did not move when a second car took the opposite corner and mirrored the stillness. Hale liked symmetry. He also liked redundancy. At 11:12, the charity's receptionist locked up, wished no one a good night, and left through the front door. The kitchen light stayed on. The card remained on the table. At 11:18, Emma stood in the alley 2 buildings down from Marlowe Tower wearing a jacket that looked like something she had found at a thrift store because she had. Her hair was pulled back. Her face wore a kind of quiet that looked like compliance to people who do not know its other translation, resolve. She carried nothing that would set off a magnet except a heart that beat in a way that machines have not learned to detect. At 11:24, Julian took his place 2 floors above sublevel M, stairwell landing, 1 door away from a maintenance panel, the kind with a thumb latch and a manual release inside. He counted seconds without a watch. He measured his breath against the building's hum. At 11:27, Claire sat in a car with the examiner and the original drive in a safe between them. The drive wasn't part of the plan. The drive was the plan, the reason to say no when asked to return what you took. You do not return evidence you did not steal. You bring paper. Claire had paper. At 11:29, a text arrived on Emma's phone from an unknown number that had found a way through filters twice now, on time. Alone. She didn't answer. She stepped into the service entrance and let the camera see her face. She let the camera not see anyone else. At 11:30, the reader at ADR chirped as if greeting an old friend. The latch demagnetized. The door opened. The room beyond looked exactly like the one from yesterday because it was a copy built by people who believe that sameness is control. Long table, carafes, a wall screen black, cameras nested in corners, a mic in the baseboard. The pen that sat on the paper was the same model. Emma didn't touch it. She stood in the doorway long enough for the camera to capture her alone, and then stepped inside and let the door close to the point just before it latched. The wall screen lit. No face, only text. Place the card on the table. Step back. She didn't. She set the card on the edge of the table, not the center, and placed a folded piece of paper next to it. Claire's letter asserting custody, injunction, and contempt with a court caption that reads like a spell if you believe in paper. She stepped back to the same point, equidistant between the door and the table. The screen updated. Wrong room. The building exhaled. Somewhere a different door demagnetized. Somewhere a camera turned a degree. Emma's phone vibrated once with a new message that arrived before she looked. Sublevel M, Suite 2. Not 1. She almost smiled. The person on the other end understood that people count from different places. She opened the door before it latched and stepped back into the corridor. The second door sat 5 yards down, identical except for the worn edge on the bottom right where a cart had kissed paint. She used the same card, and the same chirp occurred, and the same not touching of pens, and the same screen lit, and different text appeared. Return the drive. Walk away. She placed Claire's letter on the centerline and then stepped back the same number of paces. The screen did not change for 4 seconds. Then it offered a sentence in Vincent's tone without his voice. You bought today. Tomorrow has teeth. She lifted her eyes to the camera and let her face do what words cannot, refuse. Somewhere inside the wall, a relay clicked, subtle as a throat being cleared. The lights dimmed by a fraction, the kind of change you only notice when you have taught yourself to notice all of them. In the stairwell above, Julian felt the pressure shift through the door metal and thumbed the maintenance latch. Manual release engaged. Below him, the magnet inside Suite 2 loosened in a way a building does not intend unless someone asks it to with a tool. 2 floors up, a car idled. Claire waited for the second ring on a number that belonged to a clerk who had an overnight rotation. She didn't intend to file. She intended to speak a fact aloud so that it would exist somewhere official if anything inside a room without windows became a story without witnesses. In a windowed office with a view that refuses to stop being beautiful after midnight, Vincent watched 4 feeds at once: a corridor, a stairwell landing, a street corner, a courtroom calendar for 9 a.m. He did not look tired. He looked like a person who had told himself the story about how all of this ends so often that the telling had replaced the end. Behind Emma, a footfall persuasive enough to be called polite approached, then stopped 1 yard back, then retreated a half step to keep the camera's field of view clean. She did not turn. She raised her hand, palm open, not in surrender but in a gesture old enough to be mistaken for one. The wall screen went black. A click in the baseboard announced a choice she had not been offered. The mic disengaged. The door behind her began to close the last inch by itself. She put her heel back against the door to keep it from catching the magnet and held it there with weight that felt like a modest thing and was not. The handle vibrated under pressure from the other side and then stopped when the person on the other side decided to try a different door because money teaches patience when force will be expensive. Emma took 1 step forward and 1 to the left so that the camera would have to accept a frame that included both the table and the door and the place where a person might stand if they wanted to threaten without recording the threat. She waited for the next move. The next move arrived from 2 directions at once. The wall screen lit with a new sentence. Suite 3. At the same time, Emma's phone vibrated with a message not from the number that liked short sentences, but from Julian, who did not like sending any at all when there were cameras. Don't move. She didn't. She let the door close the rest of the inch on her heel, felt the magnet kiss and disengage because the manual release above had stolen its certainty. The handle on the other side tested, found nothing to latch to, and decided to wait instead of force. The lights in the corridor blinked once like nerves and then steadied. Air moved. Somewhere a vent executed a script. Somewhere a judge glanced at a clock and decided to sleep or to read 1 more page. Somewhere upstairs a printer jammed on heavy stock, and someone swore quietly and then laughed because of the absurdity of cursing a machine while a city tried to balance itself. Emma picked up the card and the letter and kept her back to the door and walked to Suite 3, counting her steps so that the audio track in her head would match whatever record the building would insist on producing later. She used the card again and entered a room that was the twin of the other rooms with one exception: no table. The floor was empty. The camera sat lower. The mic light did not glow. She stood in the center and waited. The screen remained dark. Behind her, a sound not meant for microphones whispered across the seam of the door, a soft pull of tape being lifted from metal. The kind of tape used to hold a latch in a position it had not been designed to hold. The kind of tape that makes a door look like it is closed when it is not. In the stairwell, Julian moved. 2 steps, quiet. Hand to latch. Door open a finger's width. Air cooled his knuckles. In the car, Claire said the first word she had not written today, on the record, and the clerk said, "Go ahead." In the office with a view, Vincent spoke without moving his mouth, the way people do when they type. Teeth. Emma took a breath that chose neither speed nor slowness and reached for the seam where the tape had been and felt the edge of adhesive left behind and knew that the next second belonged to someone else unless she paid for it with motion. She paid. She pulled the door hard enough to make the tape give, stepped into the corridor backward so the camera would keep her face, and saw the person who had been waiting across the hall step into a frame he had not planned to be in. Richard Hale. He did not look surprised. He never does. He lifted one hand that wasn't empty and wasn't a weapon and covered the camera lens in the corner with the soft of his palm like a person comforting a child. The corridor lights dimmed to a polite dusk. The van door slammed, sealing in the stale air and the smell of machine oil. Emma felt the vibration before she heard the hum, the low, unbroken tone of an electric engine climbing toward speed. They weren't going far. That was clear from the shallow incline of the road beneath them. Vincent's people didn't need distance. They needed control. Mark's head was tilted down, his expression unreadable. Not submission, calculation. She had seen it before, in boardrooms and negotiations where he had no weapons but the truth and the ability to bend it. But this wasn't a room. This was a moving box with no windows and a lock that only worked one way. Hale sat opposite them, posture loose, eyes flicking to the small black dome above his head, a camera with a blinking green light. He knew they were being watched. More importantly, he knew who was watching. "You're quiet," Hale said. Mark didn't answer. Emma glanced between them, reading currents she couldn't hear. She'd learned that Hale was dangerous in a different way from Vincent. Vincent was pure force, leverage, pressure, spectacle. Hale was stillness. He could stand next to a storm and convince you the rain was part of the plan. The van slowed, turned, and stopped. The rear doors opened onto a structure that looked like the service entrance to a corporate facility. Plain steel, lit by fluorescent strips, guarded by the presence of cameras more than people. They were led inside, down a short corridor, into a room that wasn't built for comfort. Metal walls, a table, 4 chairs, and a control panel recessed into the wall beside the only door. Hale gestured for them to sit. Vincent's voice came from the intercom, smooth and unhurried. "Mark. Emma. I've been patient. More patient than anyone in my position has reason to be. But my patience has limits. You have something of mine. I want it back." Mark's eyes stayed on the metal tabletop. "It's in the custody of legal counsel. Chain of evidence is established." Vincent chuckled. Chain of evidence. Such faith in paper. But paper burns. People break. And there's more than one way to close a door. The intercom clicked off. Emma's pulse thudded in her ears. "What's his play?" she asked, voice low. Hale leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "He wants you to think this is about the drive. It's not. That's already compromised, one way or another. This is about time. He's delaying you while he fixes the optics." Mark finally met his eyes. "And you're helping him?" Hale's jaw tightened, the first real crack in his composure. "I'm helping me. Vincent's too reckless. You're too stubborn. I'm the only one here thinking long-term." The door opened, and 2 men entered, one carrying a slim tablet, the other holding a small black case. The tablet was placed in front of Hale, the case in front of Mark. Hale tapped the screen, and a live video feed appeared, Claire, in what looked like a courthouse hallway, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. She was speaking urgently to someone off-camera, gesturing toward a sealed envelope in her hand. Vincent's voice returned, this time from the tablet speakers. "As you can see, your counsel is in motion. She's about to hand over the drive. What happens next depends entirely on you." The image shifted, now showing Julian in a dimly lit stairwell, pressed flat against the wall as a pair of armed men moved past him. Emma felt the walls of the room closing in. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a staged performance designed to fracture them. Mark opened the black case. Inside was a single, unmarked keycard and a folded sheet of paper. He unfolded the paper. 2 words were printed in bold type, Sublevel 5. He looked at Hale. "What's down there?" Hale didn't answer. Vincent's voice. "You have 10 minutes. Take the card, go to Sublevel 5, and we'll make an exchange. Your choice." The intercom went silent. Mark stood, tucking the card into his pocket. "Emma stays here." Emma rose to her feet. "Not a chance." Hale's gaze cut between them. "You both go, or neither of you does. That's the rule." The corridor beyond the door was colder, the air carrying a metallic tang. They descended in a freight elevator, the numbers on the panel stopping at B4. Below that, a small slot accepted the keycard. Mark slid it in. The doors closed, and the descent continued. When the doors opened, the space was unlike any level above. The walls were raw concrete, the lighting dim and uneven. Rows of locked cages lined the corridor, each marked with a stenciled code. A single figure waited at the far end, Vincent. He wasn't smiling. That, more than anything, set Emma on edge. "You've caused me a great deal of inconvenience," he said. "But I'm nothing if not a businessman. I prefer deals to destruction." Mark stepped forward. "Then deal." Vincent gestured toward a cage. Inside, on a metal shelf, sat another black aluminum case, identical to the one Claire had carried. "This," Vincent said, "is the original. What you have is a copy. I can make both disappear, or I can let one survive. Your choice decides who walks out of here." The sound of boots on concrete echoed from behind them. Hale, flanked by two more men. Emma's mind was already moving ahead, calculating angles, counting exits. There were only two ways out, the elevator they came down in, and a steel door at the far end, behind Vincent. Mark's hand brushed against hers, a subtle signal. He was ready to move. Hale's voice broke the silence. "Clock's running." Somewhere above them, an alarm began to sound, faint but growing louder. Vincent's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" Emma allowed herself the smallest smile. "Your long-term problem." The steel door behind him clanged as locks disengaged. Light flooded in, and figures moved quickly into the space. Claire, Julian, and 3 uniformed officers. The room exploded into motion. Vincent lunged toward the cage. Hale pivoted, not toward Mark or Emma, but toward one of Vincent's men, a clean takedown that left the man gasping on the concrete. Claire shouted for the officers to secure the cases. Julian was already moving to cut off Vincent's retreat. Emma grabbed the case from the cage, clutching it to her chest. Mark took her arm, pulling her toward the open steel door. Vincent turned, fury twisting his face, but froze at the sight of Hale standing between him and the elevator. "You're done," Hale said. The alarm blared, echoing through the sublevel. Overhead, a voice crackled through the intercom. "All personnel, evacuate immediately." Mark and Emma reached the steel door, Claire and Julian close behind. Officers moved to take Vincent into custody, but he didn't resist. His eyes stayed locked on Mark, a silent promise that this wasn't finished. They stepped into the light, the cold air of the surface hitting them like a wave. Sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer. Emma glanced back once, catching Vincent's gaze just before the door shut between them. Mark's voice was low, steady. "It's over." Emma shook her head. "No. It's just started." The sunlight was almost blinding after the hours underground. The sudden brightness caught the glint of siren lights bouncing off nearby buildings, painting the street in fractured reds and blues. Mark kept his grip firm on Emma's arm, steering her through the chaos toward the waiting police line. Claire stayed at their flank, the black aluminum case clutched under her arm like it was made of glass. Behind them, the steel door slammed shut, sealing off the sublevel. Somewhere inside, Vincent was being escorted into custody. They'd gotten him, at least for now. A half-dozen reporters swarmed, but uniformed officers pushed them back. One officer in a dark jacket approached. "We need you to come with us, sir." "Ma'am." "All of you." They were hustled into an unmarked sedan. The moment the doors closed, the din of the street muted. The driver didn't speak. He simply turned the wheel and guided them into the slow-moving river of emergency vehicles. Emma sat back, exhaling for the first time since the sublevel. Her hands still shook. Mark reached over, his palm covering hers. "It's done," he said quietly. Claire gave a short, humorless laugh. "Done. Vincent's lawyers will flood the courthouse before he even sees a cell." Mark didn't argue. He knew she was right. Vincent wasn't the type to vanish quietly. The sedan pulled into a secured parking structure beneath the courthouse. They were met by 2 federal agents who led them upstairs through a staff-only elevator. The hearing was already in session when they entered. Vincent sat at the defense table, flanked by two high-priced attorneys. His suit was immaculate, his expression calm. But his eyes, those betrayed the truth. They flicked to Mark, to Emma, to the case in Claire's hands. The presiding judge motioned them forward. Claire set the case on the evidence table, snapping it open. Inside, the drive gleamed under the fluorescent lights. It wasn't just a copy. It was the original, untouched, unaltered, impossible to dispute. The prosecutor began his statement, laying out the chain of events, the evidence, the witnesses. Each piece slotted into place, building a wall even Vincent's legal team couldn't scale. When the footage from Sublevel 5 played on the courtroom monitors, the attempted coercion, the physical control, Hale's unexpected intervention, the murmurs in the room swelled. Even the jury, trained to remain neutral, shifted in their seats. Vincent leaned toward his attorney, whispering something sharp. The man shook his head, lips pressed tight. Emma kept her gaze forward, her breathing slow. This wasn't just about the legal victory. It was about reclaiming the narrative Vincent had stolen, turning his own tactics against him. Hours passed. By late afternoon, the judge delivered his ruling. Vincent was to be held without bail, pending federal charges. His assets would be frozen. His media licenses revoked. The web he'd built for years collapsed in one sentence. Outside, the press converged again. Mark gave a brief statement, calm, measured, offering no gloating. "The truth matters," he said into the microphones. "No one is above it." Emma stayed silent, her hand in his. She didn't need to speak. The cameras caught what mattered, her standing beside him, no longer in anyone's shadow. By evening, they were back at Mark's penthouse. The skyline stretched in every direction, lights blinking against the dark. Claire poured 3 glasses of whiskey, sliding one to Julian when he arrived. "To surviving the storm," she said, raising hers. Julian clinked his glass. "And to keeping the door closed behind it." Emma stood by the window, looking out. "It's not over," she said softly. Mark joined her. "No," he agreed. "But we're stronger now." Somewhere across the city, in a federal holding cell, Vincent sat alone. The cameras were off, the audience gone. But in his mind, the game was still on. A week later, a package arrived at Mark's office. No return address. Inside was a single playing card, the King of Spades, with one sentence written in careful block letters. "Next time, I won't play fair." Mark folded the card and slid it into his desk drawer. He didn't tell Emma. Not yet. For now, they had peace. The city moved on. Headlines shifted. But the players who understood the deeper game knew this was only one battle in a war that would stretch beyond boardrooms and courtrooms, into the places no camera could see. And when that day came, Mark Reynolds would be ready. The city looked different at night now. It wasn't quieter, New York never was, but the noise had shifted. Less urgency. Fewer sirens. The chaos that had swirled around Mark's life for months had settled into a steady hum. From the balcony of his penthouse, he could see the Hudson glittering in the distance, ferries leaving light trails across the water. Emma leaned against the railing beside him, her hair loose, the wind tugging at it. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The silence between them was a rare thing, something neither had taken for granted since Vincent's arrest. Claire and Julian were inside, talking over low music. The whiskey bottle on the counter was half empty, a testament to both relief and exhaustion. Mark thought about the trial, about how close they'd come to losing. He thought about Vincent's final message, the King of Spades now locked in his desk. And he thought about what came next. He didn't have to wait long for an answer. The call came just after midnight. A number he didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end carried the kind of calm authority that didn't need introduction. "Mr. Reynolds, my name is Senator Caldwell. I'd like to discuss an opportunity with you. One that could expand your reach, influence policy, reshape the narrative for this city, and perhaps more." Mark didn't commit. He listened. Caldwell spoke in broad strokes, reform, infrastructure, transparency, but the subtext was clear. They wanted him in politics. When the call ended, he stood for a moment in the dark, phone in hand. He could feel Emma's gaze on him from the balcony doorway. "You're thinking about it," she said. He didn't answer. The following week unfolded like a slow, deliberate test. Invitations arrived, private dinners, closed-door panels, discreet meetings with people whose names never appeared on official rosters. Caldwell was everywhere without ever being seen. Claire noticed first. "They're grooming you," she said one afternoon over coffee. "Not for a board seat. For office." Mark's response was measured. "It's not a bad thing to have influence. It is if it costs you more than you're willing to pay." By midweek, the pressure had doubled. Caldwell's aides began feeding him data, polling numbers, public sentiment analysis, outlines of a potential campaign platform. It was polished, strategic, and alarmingly persuasive. But with every new document, every whispered assurance of support, came a subtle undertone, the kind of conditional loyalty that smelled faintly of Vincent's world. Then came the envelope. No return address. Inside was a single page. "We can help you win. But you'll owe us." No signature, just a small embossed emblem in the corner, an unfamiliar crest, but the kind of mark used by people who didn't need names. Mark burned the page in his fireplace, but the emblem stayed in his mind. 2 nights later, the peace shattered. Emma had taken an evening walk alone, something she hadn't done since before the trial. She returned pale, her hands shaking. "Someone followed me," she said. "Not close. Just there. Every turn I made, they made." Mark's chest tightened. He called Julian, who pulled traffic cam footage. The images were grainy, but the outline of the figure was clear. Tall, broad-shouldered, a slow, deliberate gait. The last frame caught a glint of something in the man's hand. A playing card. The king of spades. Mark knew then that Vincent's reach had never been about prison walls. The next morning, Caldwell called again. His tone was firmer this time. "You need allies, Mark. The kind we can provide. Otherwise, the past has a way of revisiting." Mark looked out over the city from his office window. The streets were alive, oblivious. But he could feel the shape of the next game forming, its rules unwritten, its stakes climbing. Behind him, the door clicked shut. Emma stood there, holding a small black envelope. "It was on our doorstep," she said. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 3 words, "We're not done." And beneath it, the same emblem from the first envelope. Mark set the paper down, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. He thought of the balcony, the river, the fleeting quiet. He thought of the card in his desk drawer. And for the first time since Vincent's arrest, he wondered if winning the last battle had only bought them a seat at a much larger war. The city looked different at night now. It wasn't quieter, New York never was, but the noise had shifted. Less urgency. Fewer sirens. The chaos that had swirled around Mark's life for months had settled into a steady hum. From the balcony of his penthouse, he could see the Hudson glittering in the distance, ferries leaving light trails across the water. Emma leaned against the railing beside him, her hair loose, the wind tugging at it. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The silence between them was a rare thing, something neither had taken for granted since Vincent's arrest. Claire and Julian were inside, talking over low music. The whiskey bottle on the counter was half empty, a testament to both relief and exhaustion. Mark thought about the trial, about how close they'd come to losing. He thought about Vincent's final message, the king of spades now locked in his desk. And he thought about what came next. He didn't have to wait long for an answer. The call came just after midnight. A number he didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end carried the kind of calm authority that didn't need introduction. "Mr. Reynolds, my name is Senator Caldwell. I'd like to discuss an opportunity with you. One that could expand your reach, influence policy, reshape the narrative for this city, and perhaps more." Mark didn't commit. He listened. Caldwell spoke in broad strokes, reform, infrastructure, transparency, but the subtext was clear. They wanted him in politics. When the call ended, he stood for a moment in the dark, phone in hand. He could feel Emma's gaze on him from the balcony doorway. "You're thinking about it," she said. He didn't answer. The following week unfolded like a slow, deliberate test. Invitations arrived, private dinners, closed-door panels, discreet meetings with people whose names never appeared on official rosters. Caldwell was everywhere without ever being seen. Claire noticed first. "They're grooming you," she said one afternoon over coffee. "Not for a board seat. For office." Mark's response was measured. "It's not a bad thing to have influence. It is if it costs you more than you're willing to pay." By midweek, the pressure had doubled. Caldwell's aides began feeding him data, polling numbers, public sentiment analysis, outlines of a potential campaign platform. It was polished, strategic, and alarmingly persuasive. But with every new document, every whispered assurance of support, came a subtle undertone, the kind of conditional loyalty that smelled faintly of Vincent's world. Then came the envelope. No return address. Inside was a single page. "We can help you win. But you'll owe us." No signature, just a small embossed emblem in the corner. An unfamiliar crest, but the kind of mark used by people who didn't need names. Mark burned the page in his fireplace, but the emblem stayed in his mind. 2 nights later, the peace shattered. Emma had taken an evening walk alone, something she hadn't done since before the trial. She returned pale, her hands shaking. "Someone followed me," she said. "Not close. Just there. Every turn I made, they made." Mark's chest tightened. He called Julian, who pulled traffic cam footage. The images were grainy, but the outline of the figure was clear. Tall, broad-shouldered, a slow, deliberate gait. The last frame caught a glint of something in the man's hand. A playing card. The king of spades. Mark knew then that Vincent's reach had never been about prison walls. The next morning, Caldwell called again. His tone was firmer this time. "You need allies, Mark. The kind we can provide. Otherwise, the past has a way of revisiting." Mark looked out over the city from his office window. The streets were alive, oblivious. But he could feel the shape of the next game forming, its rules unwritten, its stakes climbing. Behind him, the door clicked shut. Emma stood there, holding a small black envelope. "It was on our doorstep," she said. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 3 words, "We're not done." And beneath it, the same emblem from the first envelope. Mark set the paper down, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. He thought of the balcony, the river, the fleeting quiet. He thought of the card in his desk drawer. And for the first time since Vincent's arrest, he wondered if winning the last battle had only bought them a seat at a much larger war.